Betting, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Bet with the Best podcast. Its mission is to explore better ways to bet on races, to seek out new, successful players, and to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. We won't be giving out a lot of picks here, but we will be focused on providing insights into the betting side of the game. This is episode 5. We've had 4 great guests already, and we have another one this week. He's a professional horse player. He hails from the heartland of thoroughbred racing, Lexington, Kentucky. He's written an excellent book called Betting with an Edge, and he's also been a longtime advocate for horse players, and he has the scars to prove it. So I want to welcome Mike Maloney to the show. Hello, Mike. How's it going?
Everything's good, Chris. Glad to be with you, and have really enjoyed the guests you've had so far. So I feel like I'm in tall timber here, but I'll do my best.
I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and I'm sure you're going to provide all kinds of insights that the listeners will appreciate. So I usually start the pods out by asking the guests to kind of give what I call their horse player origin story, how they got started in this crazy game, and how that evolved into, where they are now, you being a professional horse player. So kind of tell us your story, share it with the listeners.
Yeah, well, I think mine's a pretty familiar story for horse players. I know I've met dozens and dozens that have a similar story. My dad didn't grow up in a racing family, grew up on a farm. He was one of 14 kids here in Kentucky, out in the country. And after he got out of the service, he was in the Navy at the end of World War II. He got interested in the horses. He was discharged in San Francisco and kind of found out where Bay Meadows was and learned to play the horses a little bit. When he came back to Kentucky and got married and started a family, he always loved to play the races. He never did it for a living, but he did it very seriously, and he was a really good handicapper. So I grew up in a household where lots of days there was a racing form laying around. Some of my earliest memories are going to the track with my dad. And I just grew up that way. By the time I was a teenager, I loved playing baseball, and I was a decent baseball player, and thought, like most young kids that like the game they're playing, that maybe you could make a career out of that. But the races kind of were an easy transition as I got older. My senior year of high school, I was completely hooked on racing, loved to handicap, got thrown out of class for reading the racing form during class. My punishment was that Dad had to come and pick me up, and he took me to Keeneland. They were running that day. So I don't think that was much of a deterrent from reading the racing form. But, I from the time I was a teenager, I was in the back of a sedan riding to some racetrack, River Downs, Beulah Park, Keeneland, Churchill, once in a while, Ellis Park. Those were our main options, and no simulcasting in those days. So if you wanted to make a bet, you either had to know a bookie, have a friend that would drive to the track and take your bet with him, or drive yourself. So I sat in the back seat a lot of days and listened to my dad and his friends go over the race card on the way to the races, and then on the way home they would talk about how smart they were, or how dumb they were, or how unlucky they got. And it was just a great learning ground for not only for handicapping, but for learning about, like Dad used to say, what makes the lights on the tote board blink. What makes people bet what they bet. So I kind of had a minor in horse player psychology by the time I graduated high school, just from riding in the back of those cars. But was a great way to grow up. Learned a lot from my dad. Learned some from his friends. When I went to college, I still tried to get to the races as often as I could, but I had a job. I worked a lot when I was in college, trying to keep keep my grades decent and everything I had going on. I didn't get to the races a lot during that time, but I still kept in touch and I would go when I could and would even get the racing form sometimes on days that I knew I couldn't go, but I just loved to handicap, and I would sometimes just handicap and have my roommates, my college buddies that we lived in a trailer. I would have them get the newspaper and I would handicap the races. They would give me the scratches, and then I would start with an imaginary $100 and bet the races, even though I wasn't there. So I was always just, in love with handicapping, with betting on the horses, with being around the horses. Right after I got out of college, I spent a year on the backside and ended up owning a part of my first horse with my buddies. We didn't have much money. We didn't really know what we were doing, but that was the only way we could afford to own a horse. Was three of us go together and we claim the cheapest horse that we could find at Latonia, which is now Turfway Park, and couldn't afford to hire a trainer, so we did the work ourselves. And one of my friends was a groom for a trainer and got his trainer's license, and that's how we got started in that part of it. So that's kind of the early part of my racetrack experience.
So a couple questions about that, and then we can get into how you developed into the player you are today. So you talked about what you learned about horse player psychology sitting in the back seat of your dad's sedan on the way to the track. What are some of the things you remember that you kind of stuck with you that you learned from listening to their chatter, before and after the races?
Yeah, well, there were two main characters besides my dad, and first I'll talk about my dad. My dad was I, I I always say that he took his betting as a personal crusade. He didn't believe in covering. He didn't believe in hedging. It was like an affront to his manhood to bet the place. His style was he liked long shots, and he bet whatever, usually a little more than whatever made sense, right on the nose of that horse. And he was very aggressive, uh, overly aggressive. I could tell early on it didn't take many times of him loving a 12 or 15 to 1 shot and talking about the horse all the way to the track and watching that horse run a really game second to the 6-5 favorite. And my dad would walk away with nothing. And early on, I knew that was too aggressive. Well, his main guy that usually furnished the car and he ran the gas station on the way out of town he's a really nice man. His name was Ralph. And Ralph was the total opposite of my dad. If you gave him a real solid 3 or 4 to 1 shot, he wouldn't even risk the win bet. He won a bet $2 to win and 6 to place and 8 to show or something like that. So I knew Ralph was too conservative. And the third guy that was in the car a lot was a guy that was younger than my dad and Ralph, and he's probably only 12 years older than me, I guess. And he'd been a jock's agent, and he had some style. He dressed nice. He always had like a pretty girlfriend. To a teenager in the back seat, this guy, he was pretty much the coolest guy in the world. And I noticed that even though he didn't handicap that well, I mean, he never like picked some long shot like my dad would, these live long shots that would win sometimes. Don was this fellow's name, and he never came up with those kind of horses. But he listened. He'd come up with a first or second choice that he liked, usually once or twice a day, and he would listen to my dad's ideas. And he kind of blended the handicapping with some pretty sharp betting. I would observe him maybe use a layoff horse in a saver daily double sometimes and save his whole day, maybe even have a nice day by not really being that right about his handicapping, but by knowing how to save and protect himself and just kind of bet smart. And he knew the races to spread a little more in, and he knew the favorites to kind of lean on. So I learned a lot from just watching the three of them interact. And they I watched all of them even when I got to be a pretty good player and got older in life. They didn't change. And my dad, he sat next to me in his mid 80s playing the races every day when he was in town. He wintered in Florida, but from April through October, he was in Lexington, and we sat in my office together, and it never changed. He was just basically balls to the wall his whole life. I would kid him sometimes. He always wanted to play pick fours, pick fives, superfectas, whatever the hardest bet was. That was what he was drawn to. And he sometimes waste really good winners, and he's still in his 80s. He came up with some really good handicapping ideas, but they rarely turned into money just because he was overly aggressive in the way he would bet. And I would say, Dad, they have a new bet. It's called the Pick One. You ought to try it sometime. But I could never, I could never bring him out of that. So, it was just that's something I'll touch on later when we get to talking about what can help players. Is I learned a lot from watching those guys and watching my friends when we would go to the track, just seeing the things that I, if I could convince them to change, if I could make this tweak in one guy's game and this tweak in another guy's game, I just knew it would help. But it's nobody wants Big Brother looking over their shoulder all the time at the racetrack. So you mentioned it a couple times. If it doesn't catch on, you just kind of let it go after that. But it's just funny how people are very much creatures of habit in their betting.
Well, that's good. It's like you told a Goldilocks story about betting. You had like too hot, too cold, and just right.
That's
and,
right.
And it's really about the betting side that you saw how important that was. It wasn't just about handicapping, right?
Exactly. It always, that's what impresses people is the handicapping. What impresses someone that sits at your table is you pick a $20 or $30 winner. Well, I never did that all that often. I certainly don't. I do it less often now. But what should impress, what's a much rarer skill, is being able to turn those good opinions into folding money in your pocket. And that's really the test of this game is how well you can do that.
And that is exactly what these podcasts are all about. So let's get into that a little bit. But before we do, I do like to spend a little time having you talk about the way you analyze the races to decide what you're going to bet and how you're going to bet. So, like, what are the tools that you use? Are you a speed figure guy, pace, replays, trips, trainer, stats, biases, computer? What are the things that help you figure out where you're going to bet?
So, well, I like to use everything I can. I want to be like that five tool player in baseball. I wasn't that, but in racing, I still aspire to be that. I have some glaring weaknesses. I always kind of chuckle when I listen to Marshall Graham because I do bet turf races, but I know I'm not as good at most turf courses as I am on the dirt. Um, and I think I'm even better on synthetic than I am on turf. But certain turf courses, certain times of the year, certain situations, I know kind of I'm okay going there. But I'm a little like Marshall. I don't entirely avoid many turf courses, but there are several that I'm very cautious uh, about delving into, and I wince when three of them are in the pick five sequence and so forth. But my the things I guess I rely on the most, or where I feel like maybe my edge it is in bias recognition, um, trip handicapping, and bet construction, money management type things. So, that's what I try to lean on because I think that's what I'm best at.
So for the biases and trips, you're watching lots of replays and taking notes. Is that kind of the approach you take?
Yeah, it's just constant, and then I keep a database where I'm entering all that stuff in myself at the end of the day, which is time consuming and not my favorite part of the day. But uh, the more I've done it, it's gotten to be where it's a little second nature, and it's also kind of my review the daytime. As I'm doing that, I'm also evaluating my play in those races that I'm entering the trips and biases for. And I'm also, I'll catch things. I'll catch trainers and riders that are waking up that are maybe uh, potentially going to go on into a hot streak just from little things that I don't think I would notice if I weren't going through the process of entering that data.
Okay, so it sounds like you have a pretty strong routine and methodology. So let's talk maybe fill in the last gap of your origin story. You've started dabbling in races a little more seriously. How did you go from that point to where you are now in terms of being a professional course player? What was that journey like?
Well, I kept thinking in my 20s that I knew probably more than I did. Um, I had some success, and I think mainly just being a little ahead of the curve, maybe on bet construction and maybe bias, where I hit some significant tickets in my 20s and 30s, but I had no consistency, and I was kind of over aggressive at that time, which may have led to some of the big hits. But I ran a business all those years, a small business, and that was my main focus. And when I would go to the track, which was maybe two or three times a week, I was a lot more of a home run hitter than I am now because it's easy to play that game when you have another strong source of income and you go to the track 2 or 3 days a week. You set aside X number of dollars as your limit, and then you can just aggressively attack that card And, my style was always, pick 3 or 4 spots, 5 spots, and get into those races and be aggressive. If you lose, if you don't cash a ticket, you hit that limit. Hopefully, you stop there and do the right thing. But you go back to work for a day or two, and then you're right back taking another shot. So it's there's not a lot of mental wear and tear in that situation, or at least there wasn't for me. You don't like it when you lose. You don't like it when you lose 2 or 3 times in a row. But it's an entirely different situation, and maybe we'll talk about later being a professional player. So I went through that process in my 20s and 30s, and uh, got started to improve my game in my late 30s, and got more serious, and really started to think about, could I do this, possibly for a living. I started to make a little money at the races. I started to be more consistent. I would still fall into traps. I still had money management issues. I was still working all that out, but I could see that the potential was there. And then when simulcasting started to grow, that was really the thing that pushed me toward becoming a player, because doing it for full time, betting the horses full time. Uh, I kind of misread that, but in the '90s, when full card simulcasting became popular and became a regular thing, there were some of the best opportunities that I'd ever seen in racing. It was just, uh, it was easier to win at tracks where you had experience and understood the racing. It was a like a net bonus 10% or something in the pools, and I guess it was from all the new people that were exposed to simulcasting, even people that were pretty sharp. Maybe they knew New York circuit, and now they're trying to play Calder, or they're trying to play SoCal, and the Southern Cal players doing the opposite, trying to play New York or trying to play Kentucky. So there was just a lot of loose money that all of a sudden is in these pools. And I didn't realize how quickly that would change. But my results from a 2 or 3 year span when simulcasting started was what really pushed me toward playing full time. And in 2000, I decided to become a full time player and close my business. And knock on wood, I haven't had to go straight since.
Yeah, but money won is twice as sweet as money earned, as they said on
That's
Paul
what they
Newman's.
say. I don't think they have a saying for money lost, though. We need to come up with one, because that can be painful.
So you said that you kind of turned the corner in your late 30s, and that's when you really got better, and it kind of got amplified when they went to the broader simulcasting. But like, what was it that you kind of helped you turn that corner where you really started to get in your confidence?
I think just getting tired of losing, too much, getting tired of being wildly inconsistent, just knowing that I was kind of uh, had a very loose game, and becoming motivated to tighten that up and to see what I could do. Uh, you know, to not accepting a lot of the excuses that, like, I'm having a good time. This is what I like to do. I that was true, but at some point I just really became interested in the idea of could I really do this for a living? And my whole life, you probably heard the same thing your whole life. You can beat a race, but you can't beat the races. And but no one really, or very few people really think it's possible to make a living betting horses. So I guess that made it even more enticing, hearing that my whole life. Um, so it just became important enough to me that I was willing to work a little harder and work a little smarter and take my gambling more seriously.
So that's interesting. It was almost a change in your mindset more than like developing more skill and knowledge.
Yes.
You said, "Hey, you know what? I think I can win at this game if I take it seriously."
Yes, and I'm still gaining knowledge and experience at the same time. I was getting better, but I wasn't getting dramatically better. The difference, I think you're right. The way you stated it, the main difference was in mindset and was in just how I approached my gambling on the horses.
Okay, so let's talk about. You said you felt like one of your big edges is with, betting, the betting part of it, which is what this show is all about. So, how do you sort of target where you're going to focus? Are you focused in on certain tracks? You already mentioned you kind of have a favorite surface in dirt, but I mean, any other things, distances, class, types of race, and then once you've decided what race or set of races you're going after, are you a vertical player, horizontal player? Do you use them all? Which pools do you prefer? That kind of stuff.
Um, I think um, I'm mostly a vertical player, and I used to be like really a mostly a vertical player. I do more horizontals now than I used to, and my results are pretty much the same between verticals and horizontals. So I guess I've learned as I've gone along, but I always saw um, more opportunity in verticals early on, and I'm old enough where early on the horizontals menu wasn't nearly what it is today. Anyway, what was the first part of that question? I got focused on the second.
Well, do you target certain tracks or race types
Oh,
or
yeah, yeah.
surface?
I stay away from. It doesn't mean I don't bet them. Sometimes, sometimes I'll have an opinion, but I don't bet nearly as much on maiden races, on a other thans with not much form. 3-year-old a other than this time of year with a bunch of first time uh, horses in that class that maybe broke their maiden in one start. My dad would call those races one liners, and stay away from the one liners, and he was generally right. I'm not really much of an angle player. I'm a trip bias, numbers, form cycle, fitness, uh, pedigree, that type of thing. But I'm not, I'm not, uh, a big workout guy. I'm not a guy that's going to trust that a first timer is ready very often. So those are the races that I usually avoid.
So on the number side and pace side, do you make your own numbers or what numbers do you use for that?
I made numbers for about 20 years from, oh, I guess longer than that. I guess I made numbers from about 1990 to up until a couple of years ago. And it's so time consuming. You learn a lot from doing it. And I made pace figures also most of that time. It can be very helpful, but it got to a point where there was so much good information out there, Chris, that I didn't think that the time I spent figure making was paying off versus what else I could do with that time. There are, with all the figures that are available to us now, uh, I just decided that I can only do so many things in a day, and that would be the logical thing for me to cut out, because I feel pretty good uh, with buyer figures. A combination of buyer figures and Timeform US is what I use. So, I'll compare those two figures on a race I'm looking at or on a horse I'm looking at. And if they're comparable, if they're within a length or two, then I feel like 95% of the time that number's right. Um, if if they disagree, then I'll do some research and try to determine what I think about the time of that race, what the figure should be. So I'll still go back once in a while and do some kind of a rough uh, estimate of what I think the figure should be. But as far as doing all the work I used to do, the day to day pace and finals, I don't do those anymore.
Well, that's really interesting because that was probably really hard for you to let go of that. I mean, that's a pretty drastic change in your methodology, but you feel like it's paid dividends because you were able to use that time more effectively looking at other things?
Well, and I do. I definitely gave up something, but it's always a trade off. So I think it was the right decision. I'm not considering going back to figure making. Excuse me. Uh, when I was younger, uh, I had some help with figures. Sean Borman uh, sought me out. I don't know when that would have been. I guess right after 2000, and he was learning the game, and we worked together for several years and shared a lot of these duties. And then uh, Sean moved on to do things a different way, and I tried to keep up a lot of that work myself. So that I was just kind of in the process every year of, I really need to eliminate this. I need to eliminate that. Maybe I'll start doing this, but it was mostly elimination. So that was the stop and doing the figures was part of that whole process.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example how certain types of information have some real value in providing an edge, but over time they become sort of built into the odds, and you kind of have to move on and let go. I mean, I've experienced the same thing. Is there any other examples of that, like where you've things that were really valuable to you became less so, and you kind of had to move on, over the years?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but there are certain just I'll call them uh, um, maybe more simplistic types of bet structure that I had leaned on, that had always been good to me, and it was a little handicapping and but mostly just understanding structure and understanding how the wagering pools work. And I had to get rid of a lot of those bets, not because of more information, but just because of the CRW uh, competition. That those bets quit working because that trifecta that was paying $180 started paying $120. So uh, it was no longer a profitable thing. So I've had to do a lot of that. I have to kind of clean house on certain wagers and certain little angles every year. I have to get rid of 5 or 10% of my wagering repertoire because it's no longer profitable.
So, can you give a few specific examples of some ways you structured bets that
Oh,
were great at one time and then
uh,
they?
okay. This will be a little unscientific, but I would just call it wading into a superfecta pool. It used to be that if I found maybe a 10 horse field in a superfecta, a 12 horse field, uh, and I had 4 or 5 easy eliminations, which that's not that hard to find. You can find several races like that a day where you just you'd be really surprised if any of these 4 or 5 horses hit the number anywhere. Um, After making those eliminations and after coming up with a couple of my best ideas, the horses I liked in the race at whatever price and whatever slot that I preferred them in, I could just kind of cobble together a quick structure of not trying to be cute, not trying to really pick the race, just kind of like the initial eliminations and then a little fine tuning past that to come up with a couple of keys and then bet a group of supers, pressing some combinations, just trying to catch it on other combinations, and that was a profitable play just because of the inefficiencies in that pool. But as time went on, it was a really profitable play early on, and then it became still profitable, but not my strongest angle. And now it is. You can't. I've had to stop doing that unless I have a opinion at a certain level to where I see maybe 2 things inside that race really clearly that the public doesn't agree with. Then I can go and wade in, as I call it, into that race in the deep verticals. But just trying to cover the race as I used to do does not, that's no longer profitable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you would you didn't feel like you had to have a real strong opinion on the race as long as you could eliminate a handful of horses. It was a big field to start,
It was kind
right?
of it was a form of arbitrage, really.
But you sort of like it had to be a big field. You had to be able to toss out a handful of horses. Then you had to have 1 or 2 opinions with the rest of them, and then you'd key around those,
Mhm.
and you had pretty good success just with that pretty straightforward approach until probably the dime supers came in and the CAWs started coming in, and then all of a sudden some of the value disappeared.
Yeah, well, I'm not a guy that I had an advantage with the dollar supers, especially at the smaller tracks. But you know, I I I still did very well in supers when the dimes came in. I'm a little against the grain there. I'm not the dime super doesn't bother me. And the 50-cent stuff, tries and whatever, that doesn't bother me. And I know the argument that it helps the CRWs, but I've just got too much of a soft spot for the retired guys at the track and and the guys that are don't have that much of a bankroll, and so I'm a proponent of low minimums, let everybody participate, and if you want to control the CRWs, then you do it in a different way. You don't hurt the little guy in the process.
Okay, so that was one great example. Or do you have any others where you had certain bets that were
Uh,
successful, that sort of
well, it was the same
value?
way. It was the same way in horizontals. You didn't have to have that really strong opinion. Like I really, have a debate with myself now before I step into a pick 5 or even a pick 4. Convincing myself that I have enough of an opinion to get involved here, and that wasn't the case. Definitely wasn't the case 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I would if I, you know, was looking at a pick 4, pick 5, and I saw one week favorite, that I could leave out, or I saw a couple of races where, I didn't like the second or third choice or something. It didn't take much, and and I was in, and it worked. But now, you have to be a lot tighter than that. And 5 years ago, it was maybe a bubble bet where it was hard to say, yes, it's right to do it or it's wrong to do it. Now it's just wrong. So you need to, come fully loaded uh, before you enter into these pools in a serious way. Basically, any pool now, in my opinion.
So let's talk about that now. Today, how do you make a decision? Let's start with the verticals. What are you looking for that would get you interested in playing, the verticals in a race? What's that process? And then once you figured out what are the pools, you're going to use, how do you figure that out? Just curious. What are you looking for?
Yeah, the first thing I'm going to ask myself is, what's my edge? What do I know that the public doesn't know? Or, what is it? When I look at what the public's going to do in this race, where can I take advantage of that? In most races today, it's not there. Or if it's there, it's so slight that you can't take advantage of it. It's not the math doesn't work. It 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 um, it, it's um, it leads me to more to passing more races, certainly, but it also leads to, I'll bet this one combination, or I'll bet, maybe two combinations, whether it's a double, an exacta, sometimes even a try, or a pick 3. Just if it came this one particular way, there's probably a little juice still in that one combination. But past that, I don't want to get involved. So basically, that would be kind of like an action bet, just something where if I'm really right, I'm not frustrated because the that exacta paid $35 for 2, and that was the value I saw in the race. So why not have it for a little something? If you miss it, it doesn't, you're not really hurt, and you move on. But just for mental stability, that's kind of the way I'll play those races. Those races now. If it's not an outright pass, maybe it's just an action play of some sort.
So what would cause you to go beyond the action play to a serious bet? What helps you?
Yeah, it would be seeing an edge. It would be me having a different opinion than the public. Me feeling certain that the second choice is going to beat the favorite. That the 3-1 is going to beat the 7-5 in this race, or that the favorite's solid and the next 2 or 3 horses that the public likes, I don't like. And I think the horse that's 12-1 is figures second best the way the race shapes up. So something pretty significant like that, before I'm really going to go strong into the race and identify the race as one of my focuses for the day. The something else that can change there is I like to think I'm pretty good at identifying biases as they're happening and trends on the track as they're happening. I focus strongly and put a lot of energy into trying to do that. So if I do catch a bias in progress, I guess I'll try to to take advantage of that. And if you see a fairly significant bias and you're early on it, and not everyone is, the guy on the analyst on TV is not, saying the rail's great or saying, speed is winning every race. If you're a little ahead of the curve, you can almost always find, some bet that you're excited about in that situation because you're looking through a total different lens than most of the public is in that situation.
So let's take a couple of examples that you gave, and you can talk about how you would approach which pools you would play and how you'd structure your ticket. So let's start with you find a favorite you think is weak. It's an underlay. It's a good chance it could lose or even run out. How do you tackle that? What pools do you target? How do you play that?
Well, it would depend on what I saw around that horse. The first, my rule is I want to take as much of the variance. If I really have an edge, the first thing I want to do is eliminate as much variance and risk as possible and take advantage of that pure edge. So the first thing I'm going to do is, can I make a win bet? I'm, that's not what I'm bred for because that's not what my dad did. But that's what I've learned and that's not always by instinct, but that is the smart play. If there's a horse at 3 or 4 to 1 that you really believe in that horse and you think he's 50% to win, I think the smart play over time is to make the focus of your play a win bet, or make it at least half of what you're going to bet a win bet, and then move on to trying to destroy the race and make a week or make a month. But and being aggressive in doing that, and that's one thing the win bet does is it takes a little of the pressure off. It helps me to spread a little less. It helps me to target those other bets, whether it's vertical or whether it's horizontal. It's a lot easier to live with playing one cold double and missing the second race after you've cashed a significant win bet on the first horse than it is to, decide not to make the win bet and play 2 or 3 horses in the second leg and then watch a horse that that you don't like anyway win, and you lost your entire bet. So me as from a money management perspective, I think that not making that win bet is not only wrong, but it's also has if you're playing every day, you're playing seriously, it has negative impacts throughout the rest of that card and maybe into the next day and maybe just on your mental state. So I believe in when you're gambling, doing serious gambling, I believe guardrails are your friend. Anytime that you can come up with a guardrail that is valid, a rule for yourself that is right, I believe that helps to keep you from going off the road. And I have several guardrail ideas that I use to keep myself from just from venturing off into trying to prove a point or letting your emotions of what's going on in during the rest of the day push you to be too aggressive or not aggressive enough or whatever. It helps with consistency for me. So the first thing I'm going to do when I see real value is, why not make a win bet?
I like that. So you're saying start with the lowest variance bet, and make sure you've got a good part of your investment there, and then the rest is sort of gravy if you're right about on your opinion, right?
Yeah, and it does it make sense? It does in my real life, betting. It just kind of frees me up to be a little more aggressive. It keeps me from. It takes a little the worry out of missing, because if that horse wins, I'm I would love to hit everything, but I'm going to walk away winning for the race, and that's going to help me in my approach to the rest of the day, and I'm going to have some bullets, and I'm going to be in a positive frame of mind, because I may have only taken one step forward, but I took a step forward. I didn't go backward when I was right, and that's depending on your mindset, that that can be, that can have all kinds of negative connotations, and we don't need that as horse players. Everybody has to know themselves, but I know that that's not. I'm perfectly willing to. Um, that's not what works best for me. I'm perfectly willing to take some risk on when I need to, when that's the play, when that's the where the value is. But I don't want to. I get enough risk in my work life without going looking for it.
So you've got this horse, you've put a good win bet down. So let me ask one question about the win bet before we move on. How do you size the bet? Do you have like a fixed amount you bet?
I don't. I don't. I size it by. I have a limit every day, a daily limit. That's the most I can lose. So I'm gonna size my wager for that race, what I'm willing to risk for that race. I'm going to size it off that daily limit, and that's going to be dependent upon, I've handicapped the cards that I'm looking at, and I'm going to evaluate the opportunities. So the same situation might get a little more bet on a day when I don't have as many options as it does early on a day when I have a ton of options that I'm excited about.
So you really have a daily focus, it sounds like?
Yes, yes, and because my number one, the overarching uh, framework that I want to work inside of is my limit, my daily limit. Because here's the reason why: if uh, if I like it's Saturday and Keeneland's running, and like this past Saturday, Keeneland was running. Tampa had a pick 5 carryover. Mahoning Valley was giving away the pick 6. What else was going on? It seems like there was something else too. And I had a couple of trip horses around the country, and it seemed like there was something else I was interested in too. But anyway, if I see a horse in the second at Keeneland that I have a pretty good opinion on, and I'm going to make a significant win bet on him, maybe that win bet would be $600 on Thursday when I didn't have that many good opinions, and maybe it would be $300 in the second race on Saturday, because I don't want to put myself in a bind with the limit. I want to be able to to let the variance work for me instead of against me. I don't want to miss my first 4 bets and then be have the choice of either betting less than I really feel like this situation deserves in the 5th bet that I like that day, or start flirting with going over limits and bringing that whole thing into play. So the way that I've determined to do it is to adjust my bet each race, especially early on in the day, until hopefully I cash some tickets, and then I can can, free myself from that and go ahead and make the $600 play, or maybe make 1,000 play. If I'm doing well, I'm going to press up. So I'm when I make those decisions, I always give more weight to protection of capital and staying within limits. So if it comes down to, do I bet a little less than I think this situation deserves, or do I flirt with going over a limit, then I'm going to bet less than I think the situation deserves.
So it sounds like you talked about your guardrails. I think I picked out two. One is if you've got a clear edge, go for the low variance place to start to make sure you at least,
Yes.
leverage that. And then your other
Yes.
one is set a limit, a daily limit to how much you're going to wager and stick to it. Is that another guardrail?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. But, because when you're doing this for a living, tomorrow's another day. And every day is not going to be your day, no matter how good you think you are, how smart you think you are, how many hours you studied the night before. There's going to be days when the gambling gods say, not today, my friend. So, you have to realize that that's part of the reality of playing this game. And, if you're going to survive, you have to respect that. A quick aside, I've had people, say to me in the past, like, uh, why aren't there more guys doing what you do, or people doing what you do? And I just kind of chuckle, because if they knew how much work went into it, they wouldn't ask that question probably. But I've observed a lot of guys that as good a handicapper as I am, and several of them clearly better handicapper than I am, uh, attempt to play the horses for a living. And it's not that they don't, bring the house down when they're right. And it's not that they can't get on a roll and rip off 2 or 3 great months. And it's not that they're not great handicappers. And it's not that they're not willing to work. And it's not that they don't love the game. It's that they have that drawdown, and they don't handle it. They get taken out of the game. So, and maybe they get taken out 2 or 3 times. And then, the psychological damage is enough to where, that it's extra hard, for them to overcome that. So, I overemphasize it. I don't really know. I just know what works for me, and I'm a big believer in guardrails, and I'm a big believer in the mental side of the game.
So the impact of that is, if you have a day where there's a lot of options, you may reduce your bet size early on so that you at least
Yes,
get your minimum in even in the later part of the card. But if you do happen to hit early, you might loosen up those constraints,
absolutely,
if you think you have an
absolutely,
edge. Okay.
absolutely. If I get ahead early in the day, I may go full JK on them. Uh, it 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 uh, it that that's what I like about my game, is that what I attempt to do anyway is to control my downside, and while not really limiting my upside. And yes, when I bet a little less early in the day, because I'm playing the day out, that limits what I can win in that race. But uh, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take many races when you're pressed up to make a serious impact. So I always feel like, even if I'm playing small, it it only takes a race or two, and you can still hit a home run. So I just try not to get ahead of myself, and the rule number one, protect capital, and don't let your don't go chasing. Don't try to make it happen before it happens. We all know the feeling of being in tune with the track and things making sense. Like even when you're losing, you understand why you lost, and you just feel in sync with what's going on the racetrack. And when we're seeing the ball clearly like that, it's usually just a matter of time before good things happen. So there are other times when when I've had a few times in my life, be glad to talk about it if you want me to, where things quit making sense for me, and very few races made sense, and it was hard to believe that was actually happening to me. But it makes no sense for me to be, when I'm in that mindset of I don't understand why I lost there. I'm looking back at the form, and it makes no sense why that horse didn't fire. That's always going to happen once in a while. But when it's happening on a regular basis, I know, I have no business punching any sins right then. I need to be taking trip notes and working to find a bet for next week or next month, because I'm not in sync. But when we are in sync, it's that's the time to hopefully to cash your normal bet, give yourself some bullets, and then that's the time to put the chips out in front of you and take your shot.
Yeah, and I would imagine for you, since you seem to put a lot of emphasis on bias, that if you can find early bias, that might be your golden day, right? Because you can cash in on that, and you've got strong opinions going forward, and you can really loosen things up. Would that be
That can be true. That can be true. Those are my best days, and those are my worst days. And they're my worst days because when you're dealing with a bias, it can kind of work both ways. By that I mean, well, let's say for instance, um, yesterday, I thought that would have been Sunday. I thought the outside was better at Aqueduct, and I don't know if you looked there at all, but so you have, and that's not crazy unusual for that to happen at Aqueduct, but um, it does kind of, and it's been, it wasn't the first day that it had that kind of flow to it, but it seemed a little more pronounced to me. Um, so I know I'm a little late on the bias, but um, it still encourages you to bet more. And yesterday it wasn't a bad day. It was a small winning day. But um, I'm just using this as an example of why a biased day can be your best day or your worst day. So let's say you have an outside favoring track. Once in a while, we'll all get that situation where the horse we thought was going to lay third right out in a sweet 3 or 4 path trip on a track, like I'm describing. They break a little sharp, and the next thing you know, the horse makes the lead, or he's just got so much horse, he's laying second and he takes over, and the guy, lets him drift down to the rail. And, even though you were on a live horse, and it's almost like your horse had too much run. They just get themselves in the race a little early, and the rider is not conscious of the bias, and he just lets the horse do. The horse is comfortable, kind of lugging toward the rail, and he just lets the horse do it. And then you're in the worst part of the track. So it's bias distorts results. So just having the best horse doesn't mean that you're going to cash the ticket, because if you end up on the worst part of the track anyway, you're still likely to lose the bet. So it just brings a lot more chaos, I'll say, into the results that day. Usually on bias tracks, you don't see $4 winners, you see $40 winners. If it's a real strong bias, or you'll see a few anyway. So if I'm lucky enough to be right in the right race, it can be a fantastic day. But I've had many instances over my career of correctly identifying the bias early, pressing because of my perceived edge, which I think even in retrospect was a real edge, but yet not getting the result just because of the variance within those different races.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Probably not just with biases, but trips in general. When you anticipate, that might have had the best horse, but the trip just didn't work out.
Especially turf racing, we kind of hit on that earlier. I think that can easily happen in a turf race. If you don't get the right trip, you probably have to be tons the best to win.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get a little bit back to the bet construction. You said, all right, we want to at least focus on the win bet if we think we have an edge there. But you talked about building out. So how do you build out typically in the verticals or horizontals? Give us some examples of, what other pools you're going to play if you still think you have an edge beyond just the win.
Right. Well, the most basic thing will be, if my horse wins that I really like, how is he likely to win the race? If he's likely to, and this is tying exactly with the race that we're going to handicap later and talk about how we're going to play it, because we have a dominant speed horse in the race that I'm going to discuss from Horseshoe Indianapolis on Tuesday. And in that situation, what the basic bet structure theory is the horse that tries to beat this dominant speed horse, that challenges the dominant horse early, is going to be disadvantaged. And a horse that may sit in the back of the pack and wait until the dominant horse discourages some of the horses that are closest to it, those horses may get discouraged, and the horse that comes from the back of the pack may have a great shot to run second. So that's the general theory. Now, that's, I'm not breaking any news to the CRW teams, because they have, when that situation presents itself, they're fully aware of of how to punch that combination. So they've gotten a lot better at that in the last year or so. But that's an example, like a real kind of classic example of how you would look at a vertical there. You also, another thing that players will look for sometimes is the meltdown race, where there's too much speed and it's contentious speed that, one horse is not clearly dominant from the other speed. And maybe you just get a dueling situation for a big part of the race, and all the contenders near the pace tire, and you get horses that possibly aren't as good as the speed horses that are able to fill the exact and maybe the try just because of the shape of the race. You could also get the opposite of that. You could get just like a 2-speed number where you've got a couple of riders that decide to be patient, and they just kind of looks like a workout. They just kind of one plays off the other, and they just go around the racetrack 1-2. So a lot of my the first question I'm going to ask is just how do I see the pace? Another thing I'm going to ask is the next race, 2 races, 3 races. Is there a horse or multiple horses in those races that I believe in? That I can tie up. Once again, I'm going to go back to trying to reduce the variance to try to take the sure thing for a chunk of my money. So if that I see 2 horses I really like in back-to-back races, a good percentage of my bet will be in the double. I might also try to hit the rest of the running picks, but I'm going to make sure that if those 2 horses win and I'm offered a double, then I'm going to take that off the table immediately and make that bet and not take that variance out. If I like a horse in the 5th to win and I like a horse in the 7th to win, I might make a small all in the middle, very small. I'm not a huge all guy, but just in deference to taking out the variance. If both those horses win, I took out all the variance. I've got all for something, and then I'll pick the middle race and try to press my opinion. But once again, just even in horizontals, if I get a chance to reduce that variance, I want to do that.
So there's a lot there. So it sounds like, first of all, you kind of build when I talked with Marshall, I call the inside out betting. So you had this win bet, and then you kind of go to the next lowest variance pool, maybe it'd be the exacta or the double, and you see if you have an opinion for that. And if you do, you might even go to the pick 3 or the try or super. Is that true? Kind of building
Yes.
Inside out.
Totally, that's exactly right, Chris. And that is just something that I've kind of fine-tuned through the years, or maybe the fine-tune is not the right word, that I've kind of had beaten into me through the years. 10 years ago, it was easier to maybe be a little looser with the play and go a little more for the home run, have a piece of that double, but also maybe a little lesser piece and bring in a little more variance and go for the home run a little bit more. But I've found, and I've heard other players say this on different pods too, that I keep mentioning the CRWs, and it's just because if they're 30% of the pool, you better have them in mind when you're trying to design plays. You need to know what who you're competing against, and you need to understand the reality of the money that's bet. So, my explanation is mostly the CRW money, but also, the average player is a lot sharper today than he was 10 years ago. The money is just bet better, aside from the CRWs, because there's better information available. Players just, they make smarter bets overall. So that leads me to fewer combinations and more pressing on the things I like, and always taking the overlay when it's offered to you.
So I want to talk a little bit about the pick 3 example you gave. You said if they're consecutive, you're going to nail that double and maybe even look at the pick 3. But when you had like an opinion with a race in between where you didn't have as strong of opinion, you wanted to make sure you hit the double, so you'd bet it once with all, but then you're going to pick, or if you have some opinion in the middle, you're going to press with one or two horses. Is that the approach?
Yeah, and that would vary a little bit. And if the horses that I think are singles are short, I might not, play in all, because even if you got some goofball to win the other race, it might not pay, enough to make it that worthwhile. Because I don't like to use the all button, and I don't like to use horses that aren't my top picks. But in that case, if those two, everything, I always look at every sequence individually, and I'm just, I'm not only seeing the race shape, and I don't have a word for this, but I'm also seeing the wagering shape, if that makes sense. I'm seeing where, what the best approach might be, if it's short prices that I'm singling in the fifth and seventh. In the sixth race, I'm probably going to go like a cold number, just like a straight pick three, or maybe use two in that second race. Um, I'm the only way that I would probably spread more if I had short price singles would be if the three horses I liked in the middle were 8 to 20 to 1, then it makes sense to use three horses if I couldn't split them. But whereas if my two singles, if one of those singles is 12 to 1 on the morning line, I don't want to miss that, because I don't know exactly what it could pay. It could be something significant. So I want to have a little piece of the all, and then I'll go on from there, and like you say, try to nail it down with a horse or two.
So you're taking into account kind of what your expected return will be based on the prices of the horses you really like. And if you're getting a big edge and a big price with one of those, you may not get too cute with the race you don't have much of an opinion on, because there's a potential for a big score. But if you're playing mostly the lower priced horses, you're going to be a lot tighter, and maybe even just pick one or two horses in that other leg.
Yeah, and when I was listening to ITP the other night, I don't know him, but I I agree with almost everything he says from a wagering structure standpoint. And I think he's saying, he's probably a little more aggressive about it than I am. But it's the same thing. As you can't just be, if you're going to use A and A, or A and B as your singles, you may not need a whole lot of A's and B's, in the other slots, unless you're just going to try to ice the thing and go, single, single, single.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the vertical in the same situation. I'm going to guess you approach it the same way, that if you have some strong opinion underneath, you'll play that, and if there are prices, you might try and spread a little bit. I mean, so how would you look at the verticals?
Yeah, excuse me. I'm going to try to do the same thing, Chris. I'm going to ask, where's my edge? If I think a 2 to 1's going to win the race, and I'm looking at verticals, um, that's not going to be enough. I'm going to have another opinion to lead me into the verticals. So maybe I find a horse that is 10 to 1 that I think fits the shape of the race. That I think maybe comes running and gets second or third. Then it's just going to be dependent upon the price. The higher the price, of the horses I'm using, if I'm using the 2-to-1 as a key and a 10-to-1 to run underneath it, uh, that's not super lucrative. So, I'm going to just pick the logical horses to use to fill out those other slots. If there's too many of those, if there are 4 or 5 horses I can't split, then I may just roll with the exacta. I may just say the try's too muddy. I don't see it. Even though I think my 10-to-1 shot could very likely run third, I may just choose to go with the exacta here because I know that's value. And when I get into the try, the value gets murky.
So if we talked about the bets and how you sort of have initial amount you're going to play on the race, then do you just allocate it among the different pools to where it adds up to the amount you were set aside for that race? Is that how you size your bets? I mean,
If I'm going to play everything, it's kind of rare anymore. I used to do a lot of that. It's kind of rare anymore that I'll play, you know, win, exacta, try, super. Lots of times I'll play exacta and a try or super, and I'll I'll usually uh, just let the way I see the race be my guide, and by that I mean if there's a um, if there's a short price that uh, that looks, like he's maybe third best or something, but I really don't want to use him. I'm trying to avoid him, but he kind of looks like he's going to be in the number somewhere. Then I'm more likely to lean on the exacta. Hope I can get him out of second. Um, Maybe play some tries. You know, Feeling like I'm pushing it a little bit, asking for a little too much, but maybe I get him out of the tries. Be less likely to go super in that situation because I really my handicapping says he's probably going to be in the top 4, even though I think he's overbet. If I if he were a different kind of horse and he's second choice and he's his form is I see like deterioration in his form, and even though his numbers are good, I think he could be going the wrong way. Then I might go super. I might just say, "Hey, the play here is just to boot this horse and try to beat him." So then I want to bring in that other leg because I could get a crazy number if I get the second choice out and I get a couple of bombs, second and fourth or third and fourth. Um, so I'm going to approach that a little differently.
but you've kind of set aside the amount you're going to wager on the race, and a
Yes.
majority of it's on the win bet, and then you allocate the rest to depending on what your secondary opinions are.
And sometimes none of it's on the win bet. Sometimes there is no win bet because that horse that's on top at 2-to-1, uh, I'm more interested. I kind of see him as a horse that'll run first or second, and he's just as likely to run second as he is first, and he's 2-to-1. I don't have a lot of interest in that win bet. I don't have a lot of interest in him in the picks, but I do have some interest in him as a vertical key because if I feel confident he's going to be first or second, I can do something with that if I can find, one more little edge in the race.
So you have that second opinion, even though you don't have value in the win pool. If you have that second opinion, and you could build, exactas or tries or supers around that.
Right, right. Whereas um, if I if that key horse were um, 4-to-1 and I really liked him, there's going to be a win bet, and then there might be some kind of if I think it's wide open past him that the horses they're betting second, third, and fourth choice they could run, but they don't have to. Then I might take the 4-to-1 shot and play, a pretty wide spread for a little part of my money just to give myself a chance to catch the super that pays, 5,000 for a buck or something. Um, I want to put myself in position where, chaos work in my favor a little bit, because these horses that the public likes, second, third, and fourth best, they just, I don't particularly like them. I don't particularly trust them. I don't have any problem, just trying to spread out and even if one of those horses runs third, if I get the right horses second and fourth, it'll still pay. So, I'm not gonna uh, I'm not gonna make my whole bet that way, but that's going to be a part of my bet, just to try to take advantage of a couple of live horses that are big prices that I don't see any reason that they can't run. I'm going to be more, inclusive. I'm going to be more spready in that situation for a little bit of my money because I see opportunity, because I see a 4-to-1 shot that looks really good, win bet, and then an attempt to score out in the race, even though I don't have a strong opinion underneath.
Okay, well that's great. And we talked some about the horizontals. You mentioned the pick five early on. Do you go that far in the horizontals with like a pick five? And if so, what would get you interested in playing a pick five? What your ticket structure would be.
Yeah, I'll play about every bet they offer, if it suits my, the way I see the race or set of races. Pick five. I don't have hard and fast rules, but I need to have some opinions. I don't play a lot of pick fives, um, just because it's a time consuming deal. It's there are, and you better have a good opinion and a good structure, because there are a lot of people that a lot of your competition that's their focus for the day is that pick five pool. So, if I'm playing 4 tracks and, I'm watching a bunch of different things, I need to make sure that I have the opinion, first of all, that warrants getting in a pick five, and that I have the time to really grind on that structure and come up with a good bet. Um, and especially in today's world, that's what I have to do. So that keeps me out of a lot of pick fives, the combination of those things. But if I identify 2 horses that I'm fairly confident in win wise in a pick five sequence, then I'm definitely, if I have time, I'm definitely going to take a look at trying to put something together, because that's usually enough. If one of those horses is not the favorite, and I can go single in those 2 races, even if they are both favorites, and the other legs look interesting to me, I think I have an angle or two, a price horse or two in those other races. I might play some kind of a ticket, even if I'm dealing with short price singles. But if I find 2 horses that are not the favorite, and I'm going to be seriously betting both of them, then yeah, I'm not going to tie up a big chunk in the pick five. But I'll if as long as I have time to come up with a good ticket, I'll venture into that situation.
So it sounds like you kind of need 2 horses that you have an opinion on in the win pool that are in the sequence. That might get you interested. You at least take a look at the other races and see, if there's a pick five
Yeah,
play in there somewhere.
yeah, either that or some horse that I keep a watch list and I put negative horses on there too. I guess most people do. I'm not sure, but that works pretty well for me. So if I have, some horse that's going to be even money and I don't like it, and it's in that sequence, and I look at the sequence, and that's everybody's single, then I got to take a look at that. If I can take the overused single and get it out of the mix, then I might have something. So it's all situational.
So what you said typically you don't invest a lot in the pick five. So like relative to what you would allocate to one of your races that you were going to play that day, is the pick five more or less than what you'd allocate to a race?
I think about it wouldn't be normally be my biggest uh, play of the day, but that would be a good way to describe it. Would be maybe my normal bet in a race that I'm gonna play, but it's not my play of the day kind of deal. That's about what I would look to bet. And then sometimes I try to put the ticket together, and it doesn't feel right to me. I can't get comfortable with the rest of it, and I just there's a lot of pick fives and pick sixes too that I look at, and I get like some time invested in them, and then I just pull the plug and say it doesn't feel right.
But it sounds like if you have one or two strong opinions in the sequence, either negative on a favorite, especially a heavy favorite that is a likely single for many players, and maybe some positive opinions on horses, could be chalky or maybe at some kind of price. One or two opinions like that, and you can at least take a look.
Yes, yeah, and I kind of enjoy going through the process of trying to figure out the right ones to play, because there really is a lot of game selection in those bets, I think.
All right. So before we move on, anything else about betting structure or selection, verticals, horizontals that we haven't covered that you'd like to
Um,
share?
let's see. Um, no, I think we covered it pretty well.
All right. So I'm going to go on to a couple other questions that just see where you land on those. We talked about a little bit about I think we mentioned rebates, maybe not, but let's bring that into the mix since you're a professional. I'm guessing you get some sort of rebates. How big are those rebates, and does that influence what pools you play, what tracks you play, how you bet?
Um, my net cost of a wager ends up being about 10 or 11%. So the rebate always varies from track to track, from bet to bet, but that's what's important to me is what's my net cost of a wager. So uh, it's kind of weird the way pricing and racing works for people like me, but the takeout ends up not mattering very much, which I'm still a proponent for good pricing and reasonable takeout, and overall I think we overprice our product in general, but but for me personally, you know, the the posted takeout uh, level is not it's not a huge deterrent. It was back in my pre-rebate days, but I've always tried to be aware of the rate that I was paying. But these days, it for guys like me, it all ends up in about the same area.
And I just want to just jump in to explain to the listeners, especially those that maybe haven't heard previous pods, what you're saying is where the takeout is higher, they give you a bigger rebate. So for you, it kind of is about the same whether you're betting to win or a trifecta, whereas a regular retail player might be maybe have a 16% takeout on win and 20 something on a try or a super. But for you,
Right.
you get the bigger rebates in those higher takeout pools, and it really doesn't make any difference.
Right. If the takeout is 22%, I might get a 10 or 11% rebate. And if the takeout is, uh, 12%, I might get a 1% rebate. So, it all works out to about 10 or 11% at the end of the year is my net cost of a wager, which is still, yes, the the rebate is what makes playing the horses for a living, possible for me. But it's still a significant price of a wager when you look at the entire gambling landscape.
So does that influence your play? Since it's the same for any wager, are you more inclined to do some of the more exotic wagers if your opinion matches that wager type? Does that give you that freedom to do that, or does it have any impact at all?
I honestly, I don't think it does, and that's sad to say because like I say, I talk a lot about takeout, but it's, this is the industry's pricing model. I don't really have a much of a say in the matter. So yeah, I just look for value in, you could say on the tote board, but you're not really looking on the tote board, but just your experience tells you that, this bet at this track, you might have a little better, more of an edge than some bet and another bet at another track. So, uh, what I mean by that is, uh, if, if there's a 6 horse field that uh, turf race at Santa Anita, I might be more inclined to bet into an 11 horse dirt race at Oaklawn. So, but that's just me trying to tailor my betting to my skill set.
So that because of the rebates, takeout, doesn't there's really not any variance in the takeout based on track or pool because it gets all adjusted through the rebate.
Yeah, the variance comes from the tracks that jack up the host fee, and they're in love with themselves. So, uh, Churchill likes to do that. So you make, my cost of a wager is more than that at Churchill.
So does that affect your play? Does that reduce the
Yeah,
amount of
yeah.
play at
I
Churchill?
bet a lot less on Churchill than I used to. But um, they're over the last few years they've raised takeout. In the face of horrendous, handle figures that we have. That's been their response, and in Keeneland followed suit with a slightly less in the beginning takeout increase. So not been good responses in Kentucky, in my opinion, but they they're going to price it the way that they want to price it, and right now it's handle is going in the toilet because of it.
But at least for you, other than the certain tracks that have elevated their host fees, the takeout's not really a factor in your play.
Well, it's a factor in my overall yearly play because if CRWs are betting, if their net cost of a wager sometimes it's been reported that sometimes their net cost of a wager can be as low as 3 or 4%. Then I'm playing at a tremendous disadvantage, which no matter how hard I work, or no matter how skilled I might think I might be some days, the math would say that I'm going to bet less as my competition increases their pricing advantage over me.
And you have seen your handle decline?
Oh, absolutely. My handle is about 15% of what it was 15 years ago.
Wow. You said 15 as in
15, 1-5.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it's kind of crazy because I went through some calculations in betting with an edge where I kind of opened up my books, and by my calculations, the racing industry they cleared at least $800,000 on me 15 years ago, just from my personal wagering. And I wrote the book in 2017. I think I used 16's numbers. So that would have been roughly 10 years later. My calculations were that they made $320,000 on me. So even though they had done all this raising of their prices, dramatic raising of their prices, they made less than half of what they made 10 years previous on my personal wagering. And they made a lot more from CRW wagering in the interim, but now I don't know how we want to get deep into all this, but as CRW wagering increases, which we've had a lot of that in the press lately, the question becomes, what is the tipping point of, they were 5%, 10%, 20%, 30%. Maybe, the real numbers aren't released. We're kept in the dark. So we don't, we can't quote specific numbers, but, I'd say 30% CRW wagering as a part of the handle is, that's probably a reasonable estimate, maybe conservative. I'm not sure. But as that continues to grow, which it's almost a cinch to continue to grow in the short term, where is the tipping point? I don't know, but there's some point where it's just where the law of diminishing returns, and it's sharks versus sharks at some point. So, it's a kind of a disturbing thought for me to play that out a little further. But that may be over my pay grade trying to figure that out.
But the one thing that you do know is your play has been reduced dramatically. I mean, you're 15% of where you were not that long ago. That should be an eye-opening number for the industry when players like you are reducing their handle by that amount.
Yeah, and as I think mutual friends Marshall Graham and Pete Fornatal stated at the Arizona Symposium a few months ago, if you look at the last 20 years and what nationwide racing handle, if you adjust the last 20 years for inflation, racing's handle has decreased by 50%. It's very disturbing numbers, and that's even including this explosive growth in CRW handle. So,
right,
I think the number by my math, if you included the CRW handle, the handle excluding CRW handle would have dropped over 65% in the last 20 years. I mean, it's a disaster.
because even the handle numbers don't reflect the revenue because the revenue per dollar is lower because the handle's going up where the CRWs are getting the big rebates, and even the bigger players are getting rebated. So it's probably even worse from a revenue standpoint than it from a gross handle, I would think.
Yeah, and we've been honestly, the industry's been lucky because they've been propped up by simulcasting revenue and now by expanded gaming revenue. So it's a very strange set of circumstances where purses are strong because of outside influences because of tailwinds that that are legislated in Kentucky. Most of those, but that's not the case in all states. So, there's no guarantee of that you wouldn't have a clawback in a lot of racing states of some of those expanded gaming funds, especially if we do have problems in the economy, if we do have some of these issues that the economic experts are talking about, that would make state governments that would tighten them up and make them more likely to think about those clawbacks. So to me, it looks like racing is on a precarious path. I don't like that path because we're no longer self-sufficient. We're already dependent upon outside sources for funding to fund racing operations, and our customer base is dwindling by the year. And the things that I see racing do, racing leadership, the decisions that they make are only making that happen quicker. And I'm sure a lot of um, hardcore racing people that have either are playing a lot less or have walked away altogether. I know a lot of those type of people. So not a good situation, and I think something that that racing is really needs to address. Where we're headed here. It seems like there is no plan. I read some quotes from Bill Nader, a longtime racing exec, and now he's in California with the owners group out there. And he was talking about the tipping point with CRW wagering, and the huge percent of California handle that it's become. They, I guess there's some minor concern about it, but there's certainly, I see very little action, and I just, I the biggest concern I have, I'm concerned about a lot of things in racing, but uh, guys like you and I, uh, that are basically annuities for racing. Racing can count on revenue from us every year, probably until we pass. Uh, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm just guessing.
What do you mean? I thought they had mutual windows in heaven.
Well, maybe they will. Yeah, maybe we'll get all good trips up there, Chris. But what I don't see is is the next generation of Mike's and Chris's, and once in a while you'll see like someone's son or nephew at the track, and they've kind of gotten bitten by the handicapping racing bug. But most of the younger people that would be the next generation of everyday horse players, they have so many options now. They can bet ball games at 5%, or they can play something on their phone at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8%. And why are they going to try to learn racing and pay for all the data and pay 20%. I mean, it seems kind of you know kind of strange that that's what we expect to happen, that they're just going to appear out of nowhere, and you don't you develop that new generation of everyday player by marketing racing as a game of skill, a gambling game that if you dedicate a lot of time and effort to it, it is possible to win, at least in certain situations. And it's a fantastic game. And for my money, betting on horses is the most fascinating, best gambling game mankind has ever created. Um, but I think we do a horrible job of pricing it, of marketing it, of protecting the integrity and even protecting the data. We can't even produce accurate data for our races. It falls on the horse player and the customers to do the hard work of trying to clean up the timing messes. So anyway, it's just it's in my eyes, it's not a good path. And when I talk to racing execs or interact with racing execs, I don't do that nearly as much as I used to. They, I think they're aware that the handle inflation adjusted has dropped 50%, but their, their bonuses are good. They're making money and they're walking around like they're Jamie Dimon. So, there's a disconnect somewhere.
So, if you could wave your magic wand, what would be what change would you make? I know it can be more than one, but I mean, what would be the number one thing that you would focus on?
Well, some people will scratch their head and say, kind of why that? But I think the first thing I would do, Chris, is we need a new tote system. I watched simulcasting come in the 80s, and I think we actually started a few simulcasting ventures in the 70s. But when simulcasting became widespread in the 90s, at the beginning it was thought just to be really an experiment. Hard to imagine, but the big tracks didn't even want it. A lot of the bigger tracks forced the smaller tracks in their area to take simulcasting because they didn't want to fool with it. That happened right here in Lexington. Keeneland didn't have much interest in it. Red Mile did a lot of the simulcasting, and then I think after a few years, when it became obvious that it was going to be a big deal, Keeneland bought the rights back for a big chunk of money from the Red Mile when they had, I think, basically given them away in the beginning. But I go through that little story because that just describes how the tote system got in the shape that it's in. Because if simulcasting, the advent of simulcasting would have been seen as a new wave of this is the way betting's going to be done, this is the way 90% of all wagers are going to be made, then I think we would have probably invested in a tote system that reflected this huge change. We went from someone standing in front of a human teller and handing them a $20 bill and getting a paper ticket back. And we went from that to all these bets going through cyberspace and, people betting on phones and laptops and iPads and every kind of device you can think of. And it's wonderful to be able to do that. But the problem is because simulcasting started as just such a small thing, the tote system was never changed to reflect this new way of wagering. So we're still operating with the same basic tote structure that we had when we were betting, in the 70s when you were handing the $20 bill to the teller. Now, there's been a lot of add-on to this structure, but that's the reason we have so much difficulty with posting of odds and with wagering security and with all the complicated things that a lot of the listeners probably don't know a lot about. But it is the root cause of a lot of our issues, including these maddening late odds shifts that would be far less dramatic if we had a state-of-the-art tote system instead of a 1970s antique that has all these layers built upon it, all these fixes, and it's just a capital improvement that should have been made 30 years ago. That's long overdue. That the tracks, it's going to be expensive. The tracks don't want to pay for it, and so they just, as long as the players will go along with this nonsense, they're not gonna fix it. So it's my pet peeve. It's something that that I've spent a lot of time on. Trying to bring to light how serious the issues are with the tote system is something that I've been doing for the last 20 years, and I don't do it. I don't spend as much time on it as I used to. I don't honestly have the access that I used to, where I could see behind the curtain and I could see exactly. I learned exactly what went on in the tote, and it was very scary. It's a chapter in my book. Not that I'm trying to sell any books. The book's out of print. It's almost impossible to find. So I'm not on here trying to sell books, but the tote problems are serious problems. If you've got a minute, I think that's something that players, I think, would benefit from, is just knowing a little more about the reality of the tote system. Would you be
go for
with
it?
That?
Yeah, go for it.
So this gets complicated, and I'll try not to get in, overly deep. But well, let me just start off. Let me just ask you, Chris. Do you think wagers are sometimes placed after the gates are open?
Well, I'm not sure about the frequency, but I know there are instances of it happening. I think there was just one this week that happened. So yeah, it happens.
Yeah, and it's happened, many times at multiple tracks, multiple states. Sometimes the betting is open for a few seconds after a race starts. Sometimes the betting's open for half the race. There's been times that the race was over and the horse was in the winner's circle and the pools were still open. I know of a specific Grade 1 race where that happened. Ask you one more question. I know it's not my job to ask you the question. This is the last one. Who is the independent person or organization in charge of monitoring the proper closing of the wagering?
My guess is there's no such thing, but maybe I'm wrong.
You're right. Theoretically, it would be, well, the key thing was an independent person or organization. So what we have is it one of two choices. One entity that could theoretically do it would be the State Racing Commission. Now, that wouldn't help you much at Tampa Bay Downs or Gulfstream Park because they're in Florida, and Florida doesn't even have a racing commission. So you'd be out of luck there. The other place, and in any other states, I mean, there's a lot of good people that are racing commissioners and very well-meaning people. when it comes to oversight of the tote, I don't know of any real effective oversight from state racing commissions on the tote providers. That's I've never seen that in practice. The other option is the TRPB, the Thoroughbred Racing Protection Bureau, and they're controlled and funded by the TRA. That's the Thoroughbred Racing Association. The TRA is funded by the racetrack. So the main entity that racing will tell you monitors the betting at the track and protects the customers theoretically are funded by the very tracks that they're charged with oversight. That no one would could argue that that's proper oversight. I don't think so. So that's the basic structure that we have in racing, and it's that's a very low level of oversight, if any, really. I can't depend on someone that the tracks pay to monitor how the tracks close pools. It just doesn't make sense. I was reading some excerpts from a meeting. There was a guy, Kevin Mullally. He's a gaming regulator and auditor. And for a couple of years, he studied racing's tote system, the same system we have now. And this was his quote: "The racing industry is the only component of the gaming industry that has not implemented any serious oversight to its technology." That was in 2008, he said that. In 2021, our friend Pat Cummins asked him, with the Thoroughbred Ideal Foundation, which is a tremendous organization. Many thanks to Craig Burnick for funding that and for being the driving force behind it. And many thanks to Pat, too, because he's done a tremendous job. But in 2021, Pat asked Mr. Mullally to update that. And the quote was, "Automatic bingo card devices in church basements have more independent monitoring than the tote system." So there's someone outside racing, that's their opinion. I've been on I've studied the tote system. I've been on the inside, watching how it operates. I've had great access to be able to do that. And I've watched, racing now, we handle about $10 billion a year through cyberspace. From my observations, I don't think there's any market in the world that has more liquidity with less protections for its end users. It's just amazing to me that the tote exists in the way it does. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, Chris. A lot of people don't know this. So if you bet, this is the same with a bet confirmation. If you on your laptop tomorrow and you decide to bet a race at Indiana, and you get a bet confirmation notice, the money's deducted from your account, you made your bet. That doesn't really guarantee that you have a bet. Same way, like Keeneland has a big party for, it's really a lot of fun. People can come out and bet on the Kentucky Derby and drink mint juleps and have a good time. And if let's say there's a young person that goes up and bets $10 to win on a horse in the Derby this year, and they get their paper ticket, they go back with their friends and they watch the race on the big screen, and the horse wins, and they're celebrating, and the winner's 40 to 1, and they're going to get back $400 for their $10 bet, and they tell all their friends they're taking them out to dinner that night and drinks are on them. And when they go up to cash the ticket, if for some reason those pools didn't merge properly, even though that young person has a winning ticket and they turn their money over to the teller and the teller turned the ticket over to them, they don't have a bet. They just get a refund if those pools didn't merge properly. A lot of people aren't aware of that, and I think it's it's a matter of time before that happens in a situation where someone has a pick five that pays $50,000 that didn't merge, or someone has a pick six that pays $500,000 that didn't merge, and then we're going to have another black eye in racing on something that's preventable. I mean, I've myself have proposed fixes that would take care of this situation, but it has not been done for whatever reason. I give you another example. Superfecta wagering. Are you familiar with the way that superfecta wagering works in the tote system? It works differently than many bets.
All right, then please enlighten us.
All right. So when we bet any track in America tomorrow, the actual bets that we made, the numbers that we bet in the superfecta, it doesn't matter if it's in New York, California, Florida, doesn't matter how big the track is, doesn't matter how small the track is. When we make those superfecta bets tomorrow, the only thing that's going to be transferred to the host track, let's say we're betting superfecta on Indiana tomorrow. The only thing that's transmitted to the host track is they ask, after the race is run, they're going to ask, if I'm at Keeneland betting simulcast tomorrow, they're going to ask Keeneland, how many winning combinations did you have on that superfecta? They wait until after the numbers are posted. The race is not official yet, but the running numbers are posted. How many winning combinations did you have on the superfecta combination 8326? Keeneland may say we had $11.30 winning combinations. So that query is sent out to all the different simulcast outlets, all the different ADWs, all the different hubs send that in to the host track. And at Indiana, that's the information they use to determine the price. So before that race runs, no track, no ADW, no one sends what was actually bet, the numbers that were actually bet to the host track. Even after the race is won and run and paid out, the numbers are not sent because they don't want to pay for the bandwidth that this ancient tote system would require to send those numbers. It's a trust system. Every day, every track, Derby Day, millions of dollars in the superfecta pool, doesn't matter. It's totally a trust system because of the inadequacy of the tote. Hard to imagine. Just a couple of examples, and people don't know that. The industry, they do a hell of a job of keeping that under the rug. No racing journalist seems to think that that's, I guess that doesn't rise to Ray Pollock's standards of investigative journalism, maybe. And Ray and I know Ray, and he's done some good things, but that should be front page news because horse players would like to know that. I give you another example of what we're dealing with this 70s tote system, 1970s tote system. Chris Harn, the guy that was the head guy in the 2002 Breeders' Cup Pick Six scandal. When I was doing research for my book, I tracked Mr. Harn down and had dinner with him. And it was very enlightening. He, I think most of the listeners are familiar with the story. Chris Harn worked for Auto Tote, the tote provider, and he used his credentials to go into the tote system and bet a pick six on Breeders' Cup Day, and he singled the first four legs, and he used all in the last two legs. Then after the first four legs were run, he went back into the system, and with those single in the first four legs, he filled in the winner. He left the last two legs as they were because they were off, and then just let the race play out. Well, unfortunately for him, Volpone won the Classic. He was a huge long shot, and Harn and his fraternity brothers were his partners. They ended up with the only winning ticket on Breeders' Cup Day, the only winning pick six ticket. And they still might have been all right. Racing's oversight is so lax and so bad that they still might have, the Keystone Cops might not have found them, but they had not played a $2 pick six ticket. They paid a $12 pick six ticket. So they had it six times all on the same ticket. And when I interviewed Harn, I said, why in the world would you do that? You red flagged yourself. They would have probably never, you'd probably still be walking around doing it today. And he said, I wasn't a horse player. I was a programmer. And $12 was the largest amount the tote would allow. And then he told me that he had hacked into the Belmont Pick Six pool like a month earlier and taken over $100,000 out of there on a day when other people hit it. So they got cheated out of that money. I don't think they ever got made whole. He told about several other instances of hacking into pick five, pick six pools. He even had a scheme for vouchers. And this went on for months, many months, and many individual instances of stealing money from the tote. It was very enlightening to hear him describe that. And I said, well, how worried were you about getting caught? That seems really risky, like with the Belmont situation in the pick six. And he said, it wasn't a big deal at all. I wasn't that concerned. No one ever asked any questions. We didn't worry about it. That's the reason that we eventually got caught, is the guys that I hung out with. I told them about what I was doing, and then they all wanted in. So we all each wanted to have our own ticket, is why we ended up with $12 on the Breeders' Cup Pick Six ticket.
Wow.
So
I remember that well. I don't remember not all those details, but I definitely remember the whole pick six thing.
Yeah. So the industry kind of conveniently didn't want the rest of that story to get out to the public. They couldn't hide the Breeders' Cup Pick Six part of it, but they certainly try to protect the truth about their outdated tote system. So that would be, when you ask me what's the first thing I would do, number one with a bullet would be new tote system, because it's what we deal with is an absolute joke. And $10 billion are going through cyberspace each year under, in my mind, next to no oversight. Do we really think in today's world that no one's taking advantage of that? That Chris Harn's the only guy that ever saw easy money and decided to take advantage of it? I find that hard to believe. It doesn't pass the smell test with me. And, in my eyes, there's another little twist to the story that makes it the perfect 10 billion changing hands to go after if you're a bad actor. And here's the reason is, once that money is bet, I like to use a pipeline example, like betting comes in one end of the pipeline. And as it comes into the pipeline, as our bets come into the end of the pipeline, then the racing industry, everybody takes their cut. They all take a commission. The tote company takes a commission. The tracks take a commission. The state takes a commission. The horsemen get their commission. And then the money travels on down to the other end of the pipeline. And that's where the bettors, the winning bettors like you and I, are waiting to get our payoffs. Well, at this point, no one in racing has a financial interest to be concerned about if the money gets paid out to the right people in the right amounts. Once they get their commission, the oversight just disappears. There's no effective independent oversight to make sure that we get paid properly. We're just on our own. The scary part is if, because of the pari-mutuel structure of racing, of the wagering in racing, if we don't get paid properly, we may never even know it. We don't know if the trifecta is supposed to pay 500. If we get 400, we don't know that we got cheated. Maybe someone got 20% of our money. Maybe they hacked it out of there. We have no way of knowing. Now, if someone hacked into my credit card and they bought a television fraudulently on my card, then when I got my bill, I would see a television on there, and I would have recourse to to get that taken off my bill, to say that's a fraudulent charge. But as bettors, we don't know if we're getting paid the right amount or not. We don't know. I mean, that we get the stories, and I'm sure most of the time this is true, that the horse went from 29-1 to 9-1 or whatever it was because the CRWs hit it late. Okay, well, that seems to be the excuse for a lot of things, and maybe it's true in this case. But after what I've laid out about the tote system, do I have any confidence that someone is protecting my interests? Do I have, any way of being confident? Or, is any reasonable person that has the information that I've laid out, are they confident that they're actually getting paid properly? I'm certainly not. I think most of the time I am, but I'm a betting man. I would be willing to wager that some of the time I'm not getting paid properly. That's just, as I observe the world and I observe this tote system, I don't think you can send $10 billion through that tote system through cyberspace and it be secure. So that's my that's why tote system is number one. I guess I've spent way too much time on that, but that's my pet. That's my pet peeve. If I went to another one, I guess I guess I would reprice racing. I would change the pricing structure and try to make it more competitive. We have to find a way to stop helping our competition for gaming dollars by overpricing our product. I mean, we make it easy for the sports betting people and for the casino table games and for whatever else is out there, because the entry level player, we're charging him 20%. And there's outside of the lotteries, there's no gambling game that you can think of that the rate is anywhere near that. And I know all the stuff about the cost of putting on the show, and that's true to some degree, but it's not true to the difference between 5% playing betting ball games and 20% betting horses. I just don't think you can compete in the world that we're living in and the future we're moving into. It's going to be a competitive gambling landscape, and I think we're holding a losing hand if we are trying to stick to the 20%. I'm, if you Google certain phrase about betting horses, my name comes up somehow, and I got a bunch of calls, especially like when COVID first hit, from younger guys that weren't horse bettors, that were, they had analytical minds, and they were involved in all kinds of different gambling games, and they had bankrolls, most of them, but they were interested in getting information on racing and interested in getting involved in betting racing, and it was a good opportunity for racing. And when I fielded those contacts, I would just one of the first things they wanted to know was what's the net cost of a wager. And when I told them, they were like, "Whoa, that's even paying half of what we try to get the entry level person to pay, even half of the 20% was still twice what they were used to." So they said, "Well, how do you get it lower than that?" And I said, I've been doing this my whole life. This is as low as I can get it. If you want to, start your own computer team, that's a whole different world, and you'll have to talk to someone else. But you're going to have a lot of money if you're going to go that direction. But so I know from my conversations with these guys who are the very demographic. I mean, they're the ultimate person that racing would want to draw into the fold and to get interested in our game. I mean, they're like, one of these guys is like 1,000 or 10,000, entry level players, because these guys they're used to, they want to gamble for a living, and they have the bankroll and they have the mindset, and and they could do it if it were priced right, and they would try it, some of them, if it were priced right. But the conversation never gets started. And then, when I go to my pet peeve and start, explaining the tote system to them, then it's like, they no interest at all. So I think we have to change our pricing. I'm not going to say I have every answer and I can tell you the exact layout that will work, but there's too much disparity between your biggest players who are taking over the huge percentage of all the money that's wagered in the country, and it's growing exponentially, it seems, every year. You can't basically price out all your entry level and smaller players because you're catering, you're bending over backwards to keep lower takeout for and making all these side deals with CRW wagers. And I'm not, their CRW wagers aren't the only issue. It's simply they're the focus of the pricing issue is why I bring them up so often. And just to be clear about that, I don't have any problem with using technology in horse racing to handicap and to come up with ideas. And I think we should embrace technology. I think that's obvious. Racing should do that. It should just be done in a fair way. That no one should be given a direct line into the tote system where they can make hundreds and thousands of bets in a second. When the rest of the wagering public, myself included, is betting at a much slower rate. And I'm a dinosaur. I'm just punching the bets in. I'm not batching at all. I'm just punching them in myself. But the problem I have is the advantages beyond even pricing that some of the computer teams are given with the access. I think we need to take a comprehensive look at everything that's going on there and reprice racing in a more competitive way. And I guess the only other thing I would say, if I could get my wish and try to help racing, would just be to improve our product overall. Make data more accurate, make it cheaper, or make it free if you can. But for God's sakes, make it accurate. There is so much, so many bad times, so little care by the racetracks in their run-ups and in their timing situations. And if they get a bad time, there's just not the level of concern from the racetracks. And sometimes it's basically no concern. And that's what the players are using. I mean, that's the heart of what we do is, we're trying to find the fastest horse. You have to time the races accurately. I mean, the data that we trust has to be accurate. And then just, improve the product through better transparency and stronger integrity. Transparency in, how you oversee the tote system, integrity in how you handle the medication issues in racing, integrity in how you police the on track the riding and the things that we all are concerned about sometimes in racing, or the riding when it gets to the point where it can endanger the other riders and also the horses. I know from being an owner and working on the backside for a year that when you steer a horse down into another horse, race riding is one thing that's been going on since the beginning of racing. It's another thing when you're making physical contact, you're throwing horses off stride, horses are coming down off balance. You're endangering the horse and the rider, but it's not fair to the horse either. And I know there's times when horses come back with injuries, and especially soft tissue stuff, where it can be the result of getting put in these situations, these hurting and unnecessary contact situations. So, I think we do some of those things. We create a better product. We've got a more competitive product. Then we've got something to market, and we have a chance to move forward and improve racing, improve handle, and everyone involved I think would make more money, would be better off. But it's time to make some adjustments and try something different other than the same, repeating the same ideas and decisions that have caused us to handle 50% less than we handled a few years ago.
All right, so I'm going to sum up your major things. Fix the antiquated tote system, in particular the security, but also just overall infrastructure upgrade, price the product better, and improve the quality. Those are the three main points, I think.
Yeah. That you said it a lot faster than I said it, but I just hope we can, that we can at least start to make some changes and start to get headed in the right direction. I know we're deep in the stretch of this podcast. I know, or at least this part of it, and I don't want to end on a negative.
Oh no, we won't. Let's move on. Yeah.
Look, just while we've hashed all this out, I just want to say I love trying to solve the handicapping puzzle. I love to try to solve the wagering puzzle. I really do think it's the world's best wagering game. And I really think if we improved our product, marketed it right, I think handle, instead of being 10 billion a year, it could be 40 billion a year. Because I know there are people that would appreciate our game, and there were people that would come into our game if we presented it the right way, and hopefully with the right kind of leadership, we could get there.
Well, it is the best game, and I think that's the biggest attribute it has going for it, and that's why it's still surviving despite all these issues. But even the best game in the world is not invincible to all these things we talked about, and certainly the trajectory is not what we'd like it to be if we want to see it continue to thrive going forward. But I do want to move on to a few more topics.
Yeah.
I knew you were very passionate about this, and like I said, you've been an advocate for players for many years, especially around the tote integrity stuff. I appreciate that. Most of the players probably aren't aware of it, but I'm sure if they were, they would appreciate it as well. So I want to thank you for that. And I know that passion comes through in this discussion, and hopefully, you never know, maybe we can get some changes made.
Hopefully, and I appreciate you letting me have the time to lay all that out there, because the tote, it's hard to understand, and it's not often that I get the opportunity to present my ideas to some players about the tote, and I think if we all voiced our unhappiness with the state of the tote and raised a little more hell, we would get a new tote system a little quicker.
Well, I think people who are listening to this will definitely have their awareness raised. I think some of the things you talked about, they probably weren't at all aware of. So, I think you definitely will help in that regard, and just in terms of educating the players.
Good.
So, a couple quick things we can talk about. Fixed odds wagering. Do you dabble in that at all?
I don't, but I would. I would do a lot more than dabble if I were given the right framework, to operate in. My fear is two things. With fixed odds wagering, the concept is great. I totally agree with the concept. We'd all love to have a ticket with a bet locked at fixed odds, and not have to worry about all this other nonsense. My concern is that is twofold. Once again, pricing. Um, I I watched the Betfair model. Yeah, I didn't participate in it, but I was just an interested observer. Years ago, I watched the some of the bettors be market makers and a lot of just putting prices out there and then that getting matched and it was all done at a very smart in my eyes pricing level and there were a lot of people that were able to participate at a 3 or 4% pricing level. And what happens in those, in that framework is, like I picture uh, fixed odds betting. If it were done right, I can picture uh, tens of millions of dollars changing hands in uh, a derby uh, wager that would uh, where a certain position might change hands hundreds or thousands of times from the initial bet until the actual running of the race. So, I would picture, but you're not going to do that at 8%, uh, takeout every time. The idea of betting, one bet is okay at 8%. The idea of making constant adjustments and going in and out of bets and going in and out of horses and the fast pace um, 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 multi move type of wagering that occurred on Betfair won't happen at 8%. And I know the stumbling block will be the horsemen because they'll be freaked out at at a number that would actually make the thing work. So I don't know how you get all that worked out, but what the upside to me of the fixed odds idea is betting, the 2-year-old stakes races in October and November with the horses first starting to stretch out, and uh, you might trade in and out of that horse. You might buy more of a horse you like the way he's developing. You're constantly buying into different horses. You're constantly trading out of horses that you're not so in love with anymore. You think the price is right now for me to trade out of. Maybe I got the horse at a certain price in November, and now in March I can double my money. Well, I move out of that position and I move into something else, and maybe I'll buy the original horse back if he runs a flat race or has a bad trip and the price moves on him in my favor, I might buy back in and I might, a serious player might make dozens or hundreds of bets on that single race over the course of a few months. I know I would if the pricing were right. So that's the strong, that's the upside of it. If it were priced right, if it's priced at 2 or 3 times what I think the right price is, then there's be some interest, but it's I don't think the bet will really fly. I don't think you'll get that extreme demand that you would at a better pricing point. The other thing I worry about is the whole model of fixed odds wagering with sports betting is losers only, winners can't participate. And you know what I'm talking about there. Of if your account shows that one end of a horse from the other, you're limited to, a very small bet, or you're eliminated altogether. I just don't think that's you know, something that racing should tie its cart to. I don't. I don't think that's a winning model long term for racing. I mean, that's the way they operate. Um, a lot of these sports books. I understand that, but it just leads to a lot of guys recruiting people with losing accounts and beards, and you're just getting into a whole nother level of deception that I'm not that interested, honestly, in participating in. I would plan on being a winner. If I couldn't be a winner, I would move on to something else. But if I was a winner, I would be eliminated. So what's the use of me participating? That's the way I look at it.
But it sounds like if there was more of the exchange model that was priced right, you think it could be successful, and it's definitely something you'd be interested in.
Well, yeah, would you, if you could trade at 3% and you could buy like horses that were running in the futurity at Keeneland in October, 2-year-olds, and you could buy, uh, future bets on them into the Derby? I mean, that would be a real Derby future pool to me.
Yeah, there's definitely that's very appealing, especially like you said, if it's priced right.
Yeah, have every horse that has a name have a price on it. Start the bidding, and guys would take a flyer on horses that never started in September or October, that had the right breeding and were in the right hands and had some works and had buzz or something. They'd be looking for Justify. And then every horse that ran, after every weekend of, can you imagine what it would be like when you got into Derby prep season in the spring? I mean, the turnover would be tremendous because everybody, the way they handle it now, I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, one family of good uh, gamblers might bet as much as they handle in the whole pool now. It's there's so much upside to certain things like that, but it's all dependent on the pricing you get. And the people that make these decisions, I don't think they understand how it's not that we're price sensitive because we're cheap. It's because the math leads you there. If I know starting out in September that I can move in and out 100 times of positions, and I might do it, I don't know, 300 times, 500 times, I don't know, but it would be kind of like a futures market that we trade in the financial markets for horses. You could do it for the Breeders' Cup. You could do it for the Derby. You could do it for the Oaks. You could do it for the Bluegrass. You could do it for whatever you wanted. And I think there would be, as long as you got a little liquidity in there, and you do that by pricing it right. Once that liquidity's in there, once people start seeing those pricings moving, once those Derby preps start, there would be unlimited upside. And after 8 or 10 years, when everybody got excited about that, there would be Calcuttas where you bought these futures, and people would have parties, and people would have their Derby parties, and there'd be all those tickets sitting in a punch bowl, and people be able to buy them at the party. There's just unlimited upside to all the different ideas that could come out of that, and all of them are good for racing. All of them promote racing. All of them bring in new people, and don't get them involved with giving them a hat or an umbrella, or coming to be seen and to buy some fancy drinks and never make a bet. This is bringing people in to the gambling part, the betting part, the fun of winning, watching a horse race and holding that winning ticket, that's what gets people hooked. And that's what brings people back for a lifetime is, getting that first experience of actually seeing what racing's all about, not attending the races, not being seen at the races, not taking selfies at the races, but experiencing what racing really has to offer. That's where you push the button. Quick story. My my wife will bring, sometimes we would, this doesn't happen much anymore, but we would have guests at our table at Keeneland. We had, for years a really nice setup in the bluegrass room, and so one of her girlfriends might come and bring a husband, and it would start out, and the husband's maybe, he's an attorney or he's a big businessman. He's kind of above the whole racing thing. He's sitting there looking at his phone. He's not enthused about meeting me. Some guy making his living betting horses. He's not impressed. Anyway, that's kind of the way the day starts out. Well, maybe the second or third race, he hears the conversation of me with, one of my buddies hanging out at the table or whatever. And we're talking about, hey, this third race, there's too much speed in here. These horses have got to hook up. This pace has got to be supersonic. There's a horse in here that's got to come running. He's the sixth fastest horse in the race, and he's 25-1. But he has to come running in this race. He's gonna get some part of this. So, I tell my wife and I tell our friend, I'm going to get you guys, a across the board ticket on this long shot, and he's not going to be anywhere. Don't get nervous. But at the end of the race, he's going to be running past a bunch of horses, and we'll see if he can get close. So they run the race, and it kind of plays out that same way. And this horse is seventh at the top of the stretch, and he comes flying and gets a good trip and runs second. He's 20-something-1. Well, the girls get to cash a little ticket, and they're happy, but they don't really, they're not really that enthused. Well, all of a sudden, the guy that was the aloof guy that didn't care about any of this, now he's in my lap because he saw the logic. He saw that my friend and I dissected that race, and we had a picture of what would happen that played out on the racetrack, and we did that purely from looking at the data. Now the guy's fascinated. I can't get rid of him. He wants to know what's going to happen in the next race. That's how you create a fan of racing. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be there every day. Maybe he's not wired for it. Maybe he's too busy. Maybe he likes golf better. But he might come once in a while. But there's going to be a few of those people that you introduce in that way where they see really the beauty of racing, the beauty of handicapping, what brings us all back every day, why we would drive 3 hours in the rain to get to a racetrack, why we do the things we do. They see that and they feel it. And that's a connection that you can't get through marketing if you spend $10,000 to try to get that guy.
Amen, brother. Amen. I totally agree with you. That's how you get people drawn to this game, and the demographics that are typically the kind of people who enjoy that kind of challenge and puzzle, and it doesn't typically the demographic that racing markets to.
No,
at least not today.
Exactly, and I in my conversations with racetrack execs, there are certainly some that get it, but there are many that don't. And there are guys in charge of a lot of marketing money that don't get that, and that should be required knowledge for anyone trying to market racing.
All right. That was very interesting discussion, and I couldn't agree with you more. Let's move on to a couple other topics. Carryovers. That's a takeout reducer. Quite a few carryovers nowadays. Also, there's the jackpot carryovers with the force outs. Do those enter into your play? Will you chase a carryover at a track or a sequence you would normally play? Do you avoid those? Just curious how you deal with the carryovers.
Yeah, I used to really focus on a lot of that, Chris. Um, Once again, I'm going to bring up the CRWs. I would, I would focus on the mandatory payout days a lot of times, and I had good success with that, and there it wasn't that rare for there to be a positive EV situation sometimes in those bets. It's pretty rare now, but just another way that the CRW is the combination of CRW wagering increasing and the overall money getting sharper has changed the game because I'm sure you and I have seen, many times where there was a positive. When I say positive EV situation, I know you understand, but for the listeners, it's a situation where the takeout on the money that's bet on the day that the wager is to be paid out is less than the money that was carried over from previous cards. So there's actually more money paid out than there is bet in on that particular day, on that particular bet. So when you have more money going out than coming in a wager, it's a positive EV or positive expected value. So if you were just the average player, if you were totally in the center of the of the all the group of bettors that are participating, theoretically you would win money because there's more money being paid out than bet in. But you don't see that situation very often anymore, especially at the bigger tracks. And that's just because I think the money's gotten smarter, and people just that there's just not as much easy opportunity as there used to be. Not that hitting pick sixes and pick fives is ever easy, but it was something I looked forward to and something I kind of built my day around, even as recently as 4 or 5 years ago. But now I approach it like I do most every bet you've asked me about tonight, in that it is a individual decision, individual race, individual sequence decision, where if I feel comfortable on that circuit and I feel comfortable with that particular sequence, then yes, I'll certainly participate. But there are many times where I totally pass on the mandatory payout situation, which that rarely used to happen. I used to always force my way in there for some amount. But today, my results tell me that I need to be more careful, and I need to demand more. I need to demand some significant edge before I participate, even in a mandatory.
So you look, but you don't chase.
Yeah, and and that's I will admit freely that there kind of a lot of my being wants to chase those, because I'm so used to I've had good positive experiences with mandatories in the past, and it's very hard for me to to play tight, regarding the mandatories. But I have mostly taught myself to do that. I won't say that that would be one of the things that I still struggle with once in a while. Is it's very, it still doesn't feel quite right to me to pass those situations, but it's a necessity, and many times I do.
Okay, how about foreign racing? Do you get involved in anything? Hong Kong, Japan,
No,
Australia?
no, I listen to my friends, and their exploits across the ponds. But I have my hands full just trying to keep up with U.S. racing, and I do enjoy. I've been lucky enough to travel to Europe a couple of times, and I enjoyed going to the racetracks and had a great time, and would love to go back. And then when I hear some of my friends talk about the opportunities in Hong Kong, especially, it gets your attention, and you kind of roll it through your mind of once in a while. But I'm an old dinosaur. Uh, I have my hands full with the racing in the states. So I'm gonna concede the big money to the Hammer and some of these other guys that can ring the bell over there.
Well, your buddy Sean is into the Hong Kong
Yeah,
races. Yeah.
absolutely. He's all over it. I think he said he was taking some time off for a little while, but I'm sure he will regroup and make another run.
So another thing that with the Derby coming up, these big cards, Derby Day and Breeders' Cup, but even, you know, most tracks have 1 or 2 days where they really stack the cards. Do you go after those differently than a normal card? And in particular, are you going to like take a swing at the Derby or the Derby card in a way that you wouldn't, or is it just another card for you?
No, it's a there's a lot of opportunity. Oaks and Derby Day, it doesn't always work out. Opportunity doesn't always lead to profits, as we know. But that's, I think a little part of that is just, if you grow up in Lexington, Kentucky, you got to have an opinion in the Derby, and especially if you're making a living betting horses in Lexington, Kentucky, your friends are not going to be happy if you don't have an opinion by Derby Day. Uh, those days are, um, they really test my discipline, because I've played Churchill my entire life. Um, yeah, I know that track very well. Same with Keeneland. I can come up with an opinion in almost any Keeneland or Churchill race. Um, I have to be careful on Oaks and that whole weekend, and even Thursday now there's a lot going on Derby. So that that whole weekend, I kind of have to have a game plan, and I have to be. Uh, I'll approach the whole Thursday through Saturday uh, a group of days as kind of a separate event. I'm going to try to be well funded. I'm going to try to have, uh, big limits those days. I'm going to hopefully, coming out of Keeneland and going into Churchill, I'm usually in a decent frame of mind. My bankroll is usually in decent shape. So I try to make a game plan, and basically all I'm doing is focus on your main opinions. Don't. It's easy, even someone like me. I can get carried away with the whole atmosphere. I'm just, you know, for years and years, I had a big party at Keeneland every Derby day. And we would get a private room upstairs, and it was a lot of fun. But it was, there would be so much excitement in that room, and so many questions, and so many people wanting to get on board with you that, and the people you really care about, your family and your best friends, that it was easy to get carried away with myself and get involved a little too heavily early. Now I play for my home office on those days, and and maybe have a friend or something over, but I still have to be careful about. I'm rambling around here, but basically the danger is Thursday, Friday, early. You see something you really like. You move in there too strong. You're trying to like get jump started and win some obscene amount over Derby weekend. That's a trap for me. I just have to kind of ease my way into it. I'm still betting, significant amount, but I'm using that same strategy we talked about early of just I want to cash that first ticket on Derby weekend. And then if that happens, then, maybe I'll free myself up a little bit and I'll get a little more aggressive. But it's served me well, just the idea of, um, you know, kind of, kind of getting aggressive with their money instead of my money.
So you are a little more aggressive, it sounds like, especially like on the Derby card. What about the Derby itself, since it's a special race and it's coming up? Is there anything you target, any pool you go after, any angles, or just the way it gets bet is different than a normal race that you try to take advantage of? Any kind of edge you have for in the Derby?
Yeah, Chris, I used to think I had tremendous edge in the Derby, and since the point system, it's negated some of that edge because the edge basically was that, certain years you would just have this supersonic pace that dictated the whole outcome of the race. And, if you approached it that way, it didn't always happen. Sometimes spend a buck would just go coast to coast on you. But I kind of consistently just stayed with not a total meltdown scenario, but the horse I'm going to key, I want to make sure he can get the distance. I want to make sure that he's got some bottom in him. I want to make sure he's got, plenty of finish. So even if he doesn't get first, need him to get second. And, I had a lot of success with that over the years. But now it's more like a normal race. The pace can be, can hold together, and it has, very often, since the point system went in. Last year was was a different result. In my dream exacta were the horses that ran second and third behind Rich Strike. So, they might still be paying me if he didn't fire, but, those things happen. I didn't see that one coming, but, as far as what, what pools I would bet into, that varies too. I've had success with the pick six on Derby Day. Uh, I've made a big win bet on Derby Day. I mean, on Derby race. I've, gotten into the verticals and done well. Um, and that's the way I want to be. I want to bet the pool that suits my opinion of the race. That's what I'm always looking to do is, I don't want to pick the bet first. I want to pick the horse first. And then I'll worry about, what bet is going to allow me to maximize my opinion of the way I see this horse and the way I see this race playing out. So that's what I'm looking to do in the Derby too. But You don't bet many 20 horse steals. So when you get into the verticals, it's a different animal. You know, you have to have a few tricks up your sleeve and you have to be willing to take a few chances, I'll say. You have to be willing to commit to, you know, some things happening, and often a couple of things happening in the same race in order to effectively bet the superfecta, let's say.
But it sounds like you still let your opinion guide. You don't target any pool. You bet more maybe on Derby and the other races on the
Yes,
card, but you're playing them, you know, tactically, strategically the same way you would any other race.
absolutely. I mean, it never varies in, you know, for the last 20 years. I'm always the first thing I'm doing is knowing what my daily limit is. Then I'm finding the individual races that I have the strongest opinions in. And then I'm evaluating the value edge type slash edge situation within that race. And then when I determine that, yeah, this race is worth getting into, and I've determined uh, the amount that I'm going to bet in that race, all that's already in my head. Maybe not to the exact dollar, but you know, pretty close. Before I ever think about like what pool I might bet in.
So I like that though. You're saying, you know, you've got to develop your opinion before you start considering the bets, and not vice versa, not going, I'm going to play the super, or I'm going to play the big five.
Yeah. I would. Yeah, I've sat with some guys at simulcast that bet a 3 horse exacta box every race, every track, and did it for 30 races in a row. And you know that's fine. That's what's comfortable to them. But you know, is that the way to make to optimize your results financially? I don't think so.
And I would agree with that. So, you mentioned your guardrails, and we talked about two of those. One was sort of limiting the amount you're going to play in a day, and the other one was the way you kind of size the amount you'll bet on a race based on that. Were there? Oh, and I think. Well, anyway, what were the other guardrails, and are there or were there any other that you?
Yeah, that's funny. I should really have like a list on my screen or tattooed on my arm or something of the things that are the guardrails. But most of them have been. Uh, there was a lot of pain involved in me coming up deciding that was a guardrail. Uh, I don't know if I've come up with any guardrails that I don't have a scar somewhere to show, where it came from. So, it's not like I sat down and said, okay, these are going to be the guardrails. It's like when I go through a painful enough experience, enough times, basically, if I hit myself over the head with a hammer repeatedly, eventually I'm a little slow, but eventually I figure out that's not a good idea. I need to like protect against that. So that's basically what the guardrails are. And they're almost like burned into my memory now. I just know when that situation comes up, it just like pops in my head. Uh, Let me think. What would another? I know one trap for me is I call it. And when Sean was first sitting with me, he would laugh when I would say it, but I would say uh, that's a case of can't stand prosperity, and it's basically just you're doing well and things are going well, and you're getting a little full of yourself, and you get comfortable, and you don't demand as much out of a bet, and you don't grind quite as hard. And I think it's just human nature, but it's not good gambling practice. And he would get a chuckle sometimes when I would admonish myself for, it was almost like it's like a heat check in basketball. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you're gonna start chucking up everything, right?
Exactly. You're feeling yourself, and so it's the gambling equivalent of a heat check. It's like kind of like I'm gonna dare them to slow me down. Well, they'll slow you down. You don't have to worry about that. The gambling gods, they they don't play any favorites. It doesn't matter how hot you think you are. They can bring to your knees real quick. But that's just like, I'll get that feeling sometimes, and I'll say what I preach to myself, and I guess this is a guardrail, is okay, you're doing well, you're seeing the ball, you're either in the zone or you're on the edge of the zone. Act like you haven't catched a bet in 2 weeks. Grind this out, and be very demanding of, be aggressive when you find it, but you know do your work, and uh, demand that the next race you get into seriously. It's fine to have the action bet and all that kind of stuff, because that's what it's there for, is to diffuse a little of that tension and keep you interested. Um, and give you a reason. Really makes it easier to pass a race, because hey, I can play this one cold number, and if I'm dead right, I'll get paid anyway. But to basically stay with what got you on this street. Don't change anything, and don't get loose. So that guardrail is not as good as the other two, but it's just something that pops to mind, because I tell myself that in that situation.
So any others, or is that
I wrote down, I don't know if these are not exactly guardrails. I knew you'd ask me something similar to this, so I wrote down a couple things, advice, just general advice for players.
Great. Let's hear it.
All right. A question, I think the first question that I would recommend that players ask themselves is, what do you want from racing? And what I mean by that is, some people will say, hey, I have a tough job. I do very well, but I just like to blow off a little steam. I enjoy, betting the horses, but I make plenty of money at my job. I don't need any pressure when I'm not at my job, because I have plenty there. So what they're telling me that they want out of racing, is they want a release. They want some fun. So my thought in that situation would be, you don't need to put a lot of money at risk. You want it to be fun. You need to come up with the amount per day that won't tighten you up, that won't stress you out, that if you don't cash a ticket, you leave in a good frame of mind. You'd much rather cash a bunch of tickets and win. But if it's the day where you don't, that, it doesn't ruin your dinner that night with your wife. So that would be my advice to that person. And if, the fine tuning that would depend on their betting personality. And this is true in no matter what category people fit into. Are you someone that likes to cash a lot of bets? Do you like just hitting the race and doubling your money or tripling your money when you do hit and you're happy and you maybe you lose a little for the day, but you feel like you had a good time and you were involved and it was enjoyable to you? Or are you the type of guy, which I know several of these guys, that you can convince them that they don't need to put a lot of money at stake, but they still want the juice of taking a shot at some real money? It's a big money. It's something that would make a difference to them. So, if you're that guy, you might want to, pick out a pick five, or you might want to pick out it could be a superfecta, where the thing's wide open and it's a fairly full field, and you're pretty confident that superfecta is going to pay. So get in that race, have some fun. If you do hit it, it's probably going to be a significant amount. If you don't, you followed your plan, and maybe you make some lower level bets, and that's what you want from the races. Then there's guys that are going to say, I'm not I'm not here just to blow off a little steam. I'm a pretty good handicapper. I want to be able to maximize my returns. So to that guy, he's looking for a little something different. He wants to do some work. He still needs to set limits. He still needs to ask, is he trying to, does he want to get better? And he's thinking that maybe he's going to do this for a living at some point. I would probably advise against that, just because I think it's a tough game and it's getting tougher all the time. But if you're bound and determined to do that, to try to be a bet for a living or supplement your income by really focusing and taking the races seriously, then I would say you need to do some work. You need to find some time to do some trip work, or to whatever it is that you think you're good at, or that you think you can develop that skill. You've got to find a little something else to bring to the table, because if you're just going to buy the form, print the form out that morning and roll into the track, the chances of you having long-term success are going to be very slim. I mean, you'd have to be very, very, very good to make it work under those circumstances. And then you need to know what your personality is. How I need to allocate my money that's going to work for my personality. Even if I'm trying to make money, if I'm a guy that I'm going to tighten up if I don't cash a ticket for 3 trips in a row, if I lose my limit for 3 trips in a row, then you don't want to be taking small money and betting pick fives, because the pick five is probably going to swallow up most or all of your bankroll, and they're hard to hit. You could go 20 times in a row without hitting it. And then when you do hit it, chances are it's probably going to be on the smaller payoff side. Those are the odds. So I just don't think players go through this process and really find what they want from racing. Even a guy that comes in and he wants to get serious about it, but he's honest enough that he says, I'm a beginner. I know how to read the form to some degree, but I know there's things I don't know. Well, that guy needs to bet the very least he can bet while he's learning. He needs to pay as little tuition as he can while he's learning his lessons at the track, because tuition can get very expensive. Someone that doesn't know the ropes yet, their chances of beating a 20% takeout are, really, really slim. So why lose more than you have to? They don't want to hear that, but you can save someone a lot of money by taking them through that process and then letting them see why it's best to take that approach. And then if you do get better, you can always step your game up. That's one thing that I try to live by, and one thing I say all the time is earn the right to bet more. That's There's another guardrail. Um, Even like when a new meet starts, maybe not when Churchill's Derby meet starts, uh, because I'm so comfortable with that meet. But like if when they move from uh, Churchill to Ellis Park in the summer for Kentucky racing, I will start slow at Ellis Park, even if I'm on a good run, because I want to see if I'm in tune with that new track um, that I haven't bet since the last summer. So I want to see some positive result. Doesn't have to be much, a couple of days, and where I feel like I won and things were making mostly sense to me. I felt comfortable. I'm seeing the ball. Then I feel more comfortable stepping up to the usual limits. But I think that's a good way to start out a meet. That's the way I try to start out the new year every year, because I've seen a few successful players that, for whatever reason, they became unsuccessful, and in some cases, it destroyed a lot years and years of hard work. So I want to make myself every January 1st earn the right to bet more. So I'm not going to start out with $2, but I'm going to start out at limits that are less than half of what I would normally bet. And that's just, it's a little protection, but I think it's also just a good mindset for me to not just get in the habit of throwing money around, to always be trying to refocus myself and um, and earn that right to step up the ladder in how much you bet. I think it's a good positive thing.
It sort of sounds like Pete Carroll, the football coach. He says at the beginning of each new year, you're competing for your position, even if you're the all-pro, all-star, and you've got to earn the right to play every year. It kind of sounds like that's what you're doing here.
I wasn't familiar with that, but yeah, it does. I've got a couple other things here. I'll try not to be so long on these. One of them is just to set limits, and I just think there's so many players that they kind of have some idea in their head, but it's just thinking through that process to where you have an idea of what you're going to put at risk that day, and that just helps you to decide which races I'm going to put my money into, and it gives you a kind of a comprehensive look at the whole card, just from a money management standpoint. And I think that's healthy. And I think there are some players that they kind of have the limit, but they just don't think it through. There are other players that their limit is whatever they have in their pocket plus whatever they can get from the ATM machine, and that's their limit. So that we all know that's not the way to go. Another thing is just fairly simple, but maximize your strongest opinion. It's simple, but it's easy not to do that. Um, there are days when I'm doing my review at the end of the day, when I'm doing my data entry, I realized that I did a lousy job of maximizing my strongest opinions. I got involved in this, thing, and I thought I saw a bias at Gulfstream that turned out to be non-existent or very weak, and I let that draw me into some bets, and the really strong play that I had at the track that I was focused at, it won, but and I made a decent bet on it, but I didn't make it a big enough percentage of of my of what I was going to risk for the day, because I just drifted off these little tangents instead of making sure that my strongest opinion is, that I let that either make or break me for the day. And then the last thing I have on the list is review the day, and that's fairly simple and sounds like a waste of time, but when you're driving home from the track, or if you're playing from home and you're on the laptop, maybe you take 2 minutes before you shut it down, and you keep you buy a little book for $2 that you write your uh, a minute's worth of what you did right and wrong for that day in that journal. And sounds silly, but it will help, because you'll see patterns, and you'll learn things about yourself, and if you keep writing that same thing I'm doing wrong, eventually, it's like the hammer on my head. Eventually, you're probably going to adjust to that.
I like that. Kind of reflect on the day, and like you said, maybe just high level. Did I make some mistake or did I do something right? And I kind of like that. Keep that log and then kind of review that periodically.
Yeah, and and it'll just, things will, you'll find yourself just getting very frustrated with that repeated mistake. And as long as I've been doing this, which is, closing in on 50 years, uh, is, I still fight some. It's not the same thing all the time, but I'm constantly tweaking this and that. I mean, I think playing the horses, you never stop learning. You never stop adjusting, whether it's handicapping, wagering, managing yourself, whatever it is. It's a constant adjustment. It reminds me of when I played baseball. You're you're constantly, maybe you're choking up a little bit. This guy's got a good breaking ball. Maybe you're going to move up in the box a little bit and try to catch it before it really snaps off on you. There's just your pitcher's throwing he's throwing a change up, so you're kind of cheating into the hole if you're playing shortstop, because the guy's likely to pull. Just racing is just like that for me, in that it's just constant. It's never just a set routine that what's going to happen before the day starts. And that's really one of the beautiful things about it, is that it's always different. Every racing day is different, and it's always a challenge.
Yeah, that's what really makes it fun. So anything else you want to add before we go into like the bet example that you'd picked out?
Let's see. Just one thing that occurs to me, and I won't go long into this. I think another little marketing idea that I never hear discussed is, I think racing needs some visible winners. I think that did wonders for poker back when Chris Moneymaker, I may be going back a little too far for some of the younger listeners, but I think every gambling game needs to have visible winners. And I think racing has to a large degree, we've lost that. People know that the CRWs make lots of money, but there's no face to that. Some people might say, guys like me, I don't know, but I don't know that we have that much of a face. We do with the podcast audience, but most of you guys are already hooked anyway. So the people we're reaching out to, I have no face, and I think that's one of the great things about the Fox shows is I think Jonathan Kenshin and Paul LaDuca, being an ex MLB player, are I think when those guys pick a winner and it pays 5 to 1 or 8 to 1 or 10 to 1, I think that really is opens some eyes out there in TV land of hey, there's logic to this. There's these, that guy actually did that because I heard him give the pick before the race. And on that show, you can also get, I love Maggie and when Andy's does his work and he's good, and Mig, I've learned so much about riding and jockey's mental process from listening to Mig, and love him, and one of these days I'm gonna make it a tug and have a beer with that dude, or a glass of wine. He may go for the wine, I'll do the beer. I have a lot of friends on FanDuel also, and I think a lot of those guys, Matt Carruthers, for instance, is I think he does a great job analyzing the races because he gives his reasons why he picks this horse and the reasons why he doesn't like that horse, and he goes in depth and takes some stands, and I think that's a good approach for reaching some of this newer audience is show them the gambling side of the game, show them the handicapping side of the game, and don't sometimes it needs to be watered down a little bit, but don't always water it down. And when these guys, when they have a nice winner, it's good for the audience to see that, hey, maybe it was just one race, but I watched that guy win money in that race, and any gambling game needs winners.
I think a couple of the prior guests have said something similar, and they use the same poker analogy, and they're basically saying players have to believe they have a chance, right? If they don't, then they're probably going to be discouraged and leave. And so you need to have the examples out there that they can see that say, hey, yeah, you do have a chance, at least to beat a race, even if maybe you're not willing to put the effort in to beat the game, but at least you could beat a race.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's important.
All right, let's go ahead, and I'm going to turn it over to you. And you had picked out, I think you said a race at Indiana or Horseshoe.
Yes. Okay.
Walk us through that.
All right. This is race 4 at Horseshoe, Indianapolis on Tuesday, April 18th. It's a 5.5 furlong, other than on the dirt for 3-year-old fillies or Indiana bred. That's a kind of a neat little condition. This is a small little 6-horse field, and I didn't have a lot of time to scour a bunch of races to try to come up with this play, but I picked this one because I thought it illustrated my shorthand for it would be kind of trying to make something out of nothing. And maybe I will make nothing out of nothing, but I've done that before, so it won't be the first time. But here's my thought process is The 6 horse is going to be a solid favorite, Hot Little Thing. She is obviously the most talented horse in the race. And, I don't know, she could be 3 to 5. I mean, she could really get bet in here. But I had notes on her from her last start. She's an Indiana bred that ran at Aqueduct last time. And she ran a little $100,000 stake up there. She got left at the gate and then made a big blasting move on the backside into a real solid pace, and then backed up some, but got beat 12 lengths in there. I mean, it really wasn't a bad race. She hadn't started since October, and that race was in March a month ago. We were just talking about the Fox show, and I was watching the Fox show that day, and Maggie Wolfendale mentioned that this filly was not quite fit to her eye in the paddock. And when she says something like that, that goes into my little data entry process. And it helps sometimes because now I look at Hot Little Thing and I think, she's the fastest horse in the race. She's probably the classiest horse in the race. Now she's had that kind of tough trip off the layoff. She has a regular rider. It looks like all systems go. The only negative I can see for Hot Little Thing is that there is a lot of speed in this race, and she likes to go right to the engine. She's out of 5 lifetime starts, she's been on the lead 4 out of those 5, and the other one was her first start, and she was only beaten a length early in that one. So she has lots of speed. She's drawn the outside pole, so I think, she breaks well. She's either going to go right to the front or probably not going to get sent. She'll probably just do one of those things where she sits outside, and if she can make the lead easy, she will. If she can't, she'll just kind of run into it on the turn and have that nice clear outside trip, which works well at Horseshoe. And I think it'll be the situation, or I'm hoping it'll be the situation that we discussed earlier, where a dominant speed horse can sometimes take all the fight out of the horses that try to actually win the race and go against her, let's say on the turn and into the stretch. There's no clear closer in this race, so it's only a 6-horse field. So I spent a little time trying to manufacture who I thought might have some finish if the race set up as I described, with a fast pace and with Hot Little Thing being a dominant winner. And I came to the 3 and the 5, Liturgia and Frango Electrico. And neither one of these are great fillies, but they each had a little something that caught my eye. And I think there's a good chance they'll be the 2 longest shots in the race. So the 3-horse, her last start was at Mahoning Valley, and it was not a good race. She just, kind of failed to fire anywhere in that race. But she's done her best work at Indiana, and I'm hoping that, there's a possibility she could be off form. But I'm hoping that moving back to Indiana, she's trained by Ray Hernandez, and he does well at Indiana. I think that's probably the track where he does the best. And I like that she had a sharp little half-mile breeze at Indiana over the ground since that last race. So that I'm going to use that work and the positive trainer. It's not a trainer change, but the positive trainer record at the track that Hernandez has had in the past as pushing me toward she is going to revert back to form and run one of her better races. In the 5-horse, the Frango Electrico, the kind of the thing that drew me to her was she was improving her speed figures every time last year. She ran 3 times last year, each with a slightly better figure. And her last race of 22 of 2022 was the debutante at Churchill. So much better horses. Wonder Wheel won that race. She got beat 12 lengths in there, and it wasn't a really fast race, but that just shows me a little quality, and it's a huge drop down in class wise into this A of event at Horseshoe. Her only start since then was a very long layoff, but March 30th, the trainer did a kind of an unusual thing, and she's a young 3-year-old filly, and she was entered at Turfway against older horses, which they I would think that makes that race a total prep. I don't think if you were serious that you would run a 3-year-old filly in March against older horses. So I'm guessing that was probably just a prep. And she ran surprisingly well. I did a little work on that time, and Beyer has a 48. I thought the race was a little better than that. So I'm thinking that even being a prep, she still ran within maybe 3 lengths of what some of the other contenders in here have run when they had better setups. So I'm gonna take the approach that the 6 wins, and either the 3 or the 5 are live to run second. So my betting approach to the race, and it's just a little 6-horse field, but because I'm anticipating getting good prices on, I will not get any price on the favorite, but I'm going to concede the race to her, and I think I'll get good prices on the 3 and the 5. So I'm going to bet exacta part wheel 6 over 3-5. And then I'm going to move to the trifecta. And if I assume the 6 is going to win, if I'm right about that, there are only 20 combinations in the tri with the 6 on top. Only 20 possible combinations. So what I'm going to do is play 6 with 3-5 in the tri. So what that will be is a little saver against my exacta, but also if it were to come 6 over 3-5, I would catch the try there too. If I had a little more confidence in the 3 and the 5, I would come back with a what I call a kill bet, which is betting a little money on my on exactly how I see the race. But I don't really I don't have that much confidence in the 3 and 5, so I may skip that part in this race. But here's the interesting thing: is when you game this out in the try. So if there's 20 combinations in a try with the 6 winning, I'll have 8 of them covered. Um, um, in the trifecta, 8 out of the 20 possible combinations with that 6 with 3-5 bet. And then 6 of the other combinations will be covered by the 6 over 3-5 exacta. So I'll actually only have, if the 6 does win, there'll only actually be 6 combinations out of the 20 possibles that I won't have covered for some amount. So I think it's a worthwhile bet, and what I will try to do here is I'll press that exacta. I'll try to bet more of my money in the exacta and have just enough try where, I'll be looking if it comes 6 with one of the horses I don't like with the 3-5 third, I'll just be looking to basically probably break even or maybe make just a small profit. So anyway, the long-winded way of betting a short price favorite, but this is one way I like to approach it. Trying to make something out of nothing, because I really, after the hot little thing that I think is a very likely winner, I don't really have a lot of opinion, but I've had good success over the years of if I can make cases for the longer price horses in these situations, uh, they tend to have a great chance to run in when there's a dominant winner. So it's a bet I make fairly often. I would much prefer if I like the 3 or the 5 clearly, one better than the other, then I could get a lot more leverage in the exacta and the try if I were just singling one of those two. But the race just doesn't shape up that way. So this is a bet where if the 6 wins, I'll have most of the combinations covered. If it runs uncovered, then I just lost my bet. But it's that's the way I've gamed it out to take a shot in the 4th at Horseshoe.
So just to kind of recap, you thought they had a really strong favorite, not really any value in the win pool, but it was a horse that might dominate the front end of the race. And you'd already talked earlier how in that case you're looking, especially if it's the other second and third choices or whatever are speed horses, it's an opportunity for one of the prices or both to get past those and run in the second and third slot. So you are the prime bet is really the exacta with that favorite over those 2 prices,
Yes.
but you also are gonna play a try with them in the third slot. So as long as one of those runs third and your horse wins, you'd have something. It wouldn't be a major score, but it would at least
Exactly.
cover the cost, maybe make a small profit.
It should. I hope so. And the other little kicker in that saver is it's possible. It's unlikely, but it's possible that it could come 6 over 3-5, and then you could catch the exacta and the try. So when I'm playing savers, I always like to, I like it when it works out to where you have that little kicker in there to where that's basically my version of the kill bet in this race is my hope that it might come that way. One thing I'll point out, I should have pointed that while I was doing the handicapping, but none of the horses I'm excluding 3 horses. None of those 3 has ever passed a horse in any race they've ever been in.
Oh, that's good to know. So the reason you're playing all in that second slot, that's why you have that in the 3-5, 3-5 in both.
Yeah.
So if you did get the hot little thing with 3-5 or 5-3 underneath, then you hit the try and the exacta.
Right. And the way I'm picturing the race, I'm picturing a hot little thing just drawing off at the top of the stretch, and there being a bunch of tired, struggling horses behind her. And I think if that is the scenario, it would be, it would make perfect sense for the 3 or 5 to have a great shot for second.
All right, great. I like it, and we'll be able to see. What I really want to illustrate here is just how you structured the bet based on the opinion. Your opinion is going to be right sometimes, wrong sometimes,
Right.
but I like the way you found what you thought was a strong favorite, but no value. And if you could find a second opinion in the race, then maybe you can make something out of it. That's what you did here.
Exactly. If I didn't, in my parlance, try to make something out of nothing, then I would either go into the horizontals, which I looked at the horizontals and I wasn't comfortable with anything before or after her. So, or I would have, that's what I was thinking I might do is try to give you a colt double or something like that. But then when I looked at the race deeper, it's kind of more interesting for the purposes of this podcast to do, a kind of a off the wall bet that is a little more, it may lose and it may lose ugly, but it's a little more of a thoughtful bet, I would say.
Yeah, it's more bet structure than handicapping opinion
Exactly.
you're trying to leverage.
Exactly.
But this would be a kind of horse that if there was another horse you liked in the pick 5 or pick 4 or pick 3, you might use this one and that strong opinion and take a close look at that, right?
Oh yeah, she would just be like all my money through her single in any pick that I played. And, maybe after the scratches and after I see the first race, maybe I'll get a feel for the track and I'll be able to come up with a horizontal play. But this is the first going to be opening day for the meet tomorrow. So, there'll be a lot to try to sort out as far as how the track's going to play and, who's hot and who's not.
But it's a real good example of that inside out betting the kind of where you find that horse and then you're looking either within the race or at adjacent races to leverage that. Now, if she had been a value in the win pool, your prime bet probably would have been just to win.
Totally, because I really feel like I'm reaching a little bit to come up with the rest of this play, but the way that I'm expecting the 6 to be so short that it wouldn't be a win bet candidate for me. So if I'm going to play the race at all vertically, I'm going to have to come up with some idea, and I'll probably actually make that bet. It'll be it won't be a large bet, but I will, I anticipate making the bet just as I described it.
You're hoping you can earn your way to bet more later on in the meet.
You're exactly right, Chris. I always live by what I say. My stepkids will be glad to verify that.
Great. Okay, well, I think that about wraps it up, unless you have anything else you want to add before we sign off.
No, I'm afraid if I add anything else, this will be the first 2-day podcast.
It is. Hey, but it's pure gold. And like I said, these podcasts, they don't have to listen to them all at one sitting. And it's going to be evergreen content. I'm trying to create a library with great insights from players like you that people can refer to over and over again, hopefully. So this was great. Lots of good stuff. And I do want to plug your book, even if it's out of print. It's really worth reading if you can get your hands on a copy. Betting with an Edge. I highly recommend it. You probably some of what we talked about here you'll see in the book, but there's more. So, and Pete Fornatel was your co-author in that, I guess.
Yes, and it would have never happened without Pete. If anyone out there that ever thinks about writing a racing book, well, any kind of book. I mean, he does lots of books, but Pete was a gem throughout the whole process. And I'm the literary scholar, but he really knows how to bring the right stuff out and toss the other stuff. And he's just very impressive the way he handled the writing of the book.
Well, you guys, you're a good team. It's a great book. So if you can get your hands on it, I recommend that. But we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank you, Mike. Again, this has been just great. Time flew by. I can't believe how long we've been talking. Didn't feel like that at all. It's great conversation. So I thank you. And I want to thank all the listeners. I mean, I've been overwhelmed by the positive feedback for these podcasts. It's exceeded my wildest expectations. It's definitely encouraged me to stay on the path. And so please keep plugging the show if you can. Give us good reviews and comments out on whatever platform you have. Talk us up on Twitter. Really appreciate it all. And most importantly, for all the players out there, may you boldly go where no horse player has gone before.
Live long and prosper.
I love it.